Chapter 374. Looking at the big black horse running away in panic, Ning Ke suddenly understood one thing. As the youngest disciple, he was likely to be the most favored, but in terms of seniority, he had the least status. Because he did not know how the headmaster of the academy would think of him, he felt uneasy. Looking at the scene in front of him, he could not help feeling sad and said angrily, "Whose goose is this? How could it be so insensible to bully my big black horse?" "Young sir, this is the goose raised by my young master." A timid voice sounded from the meadow, and second brother's little attendant walked out. Of course, Ning Ke knew that the big white goose was second brother's pet. Previously, when second brother was not around, he used the goose to vent his emotions. Now that the little attendant had appeared, even if Yi Hong Yu had the guts to lend him, he would not dare to really pull the big white goose over and kick it. He reached out to touch the little attendant's pink face and sighed, "I just said it casually. Don't take it to heart and don't remember it." The little attendant opened his eyes wide, nodded hard, and then went to chase the goose. At this time, the big white goose had already chased the big black horse to the mirror lake. The little white wolf that had curled up into a ball and pretended to be dead in the grass confirmed that those terrifying fellows had disappeared. Only then did it cowardly stand up and run back to Tang Xiaotong's side with its furry tail between its legs. It didn't dare to leave even half a step. It was so frightened that even walking seemed to be a little weak. Tang Xiaotong held it in her arms. The little white wolf felt a lot safer. It poked its head out of her arm and looked at the direction of the lake. It looked at the black shadow and white smoke that was chasing after the white smoke. Thought that this place was too strange. Even a talented snowfield direwolf prince with noble bloodline didn't seem to be ranked in this place. Ning Ke did not know that the little white wolf in Tang Xiaotong's arms had very similar feelings with him, or he might hold the little white wolf in his arms and cry bitterly. Chun Pippi and Sang Sang stood by the mirror lake and waited. When he saw clearly the little girl beside Ning Ke, he could not help but be shocked. He thought to himself, "Isn't this the little girl who broke the big stone on the chest at the south gate? How did she enter the back of the mountain of the academy? I've been in the academy for so many years. Except for Sang Sang and the calligraphy addict, no one else can enter the cliff plateau. I really want to know who this little girl is in your family. She doesn't belong to my family." The headmaster let her in. Hearing Ning Ke's answer, Chun Pippi was even more surprised. He looked at the little girl in the tattered leather coat and gradually frowned. Thinking of the old coat that eldest brother always wore, he hesitantly asked, "Teacher brought her in? Could it be that this little girl is from eldest senior brother's family?" Ning Ke walked to Sang Sang and listened to Chun Pippi's wild guesses. He said angrily, "Stop guessing. You won't be happy even if you know who she is." Chun Pippi looked at the little girl who was holding a white puppy and liked her more and more. He said with a smile, "She's just a little girl. How could she make me unhappy?" Tang Xiaotong looked at the fat man and remembered the conversation between Ning Ke and Yi Hong Yu on the mountain road in the wilderness. In the conversation, there was a guy who was said to be very talented in cultivation but had an extremely bad temperament. She asked curiously, "Are you the fat genius Ning Ke mentioned who knew his destiny at a young age?" Chun Pippi nodded slightly proudly. He thought that Ning Ke's younger brother did not forget to tell others about his senior brother's genius when he was traveling outside. He was about to pat Ning Ke's shoulder when he suddenly thought of the last 3 words of the little girl, fat. He looked a little annoyed. Ning Ke looked at him and said, "Yi Hong Yu called me fat. If you don't like it, you can go to the West Hill Divine Palace and ask her to solve the problem. Then forget it." Hearing Yi Hong Yu's name, Chun Pippi felt a headache and quickly made a decision. He was a very smart person. He thought that Ning Ke had only met Yi Hong Yu in the wilderness, so according to the little girl, she was also there. He could not help but ask in surprise, "So you met in the wilderness?" Ning Ke nodded. Chun Pippi said, Then why didn't you say so at the city gate? Ning Ke said, Because I didn't want you to know each other. Chen Pippi looked at Tang Xiaotong's blushing face, clean eyebrows, and the little braid that swayed around her knees. He thought that if it was untied, it would be a head of beautiful black hair. He could not help but feel moved. This was the appearance of his favorite girl. Suddenly, he remembered that he had once told Ning Ke about this. He turned around and stared at Ning Quebec. He thought that Ning Ke knew that he liked this kind of girl, but he did not want him to know her. What was his intention? Ning Ke thought that since the headmaster of the academy had allowed Tang Xiaotong to enter the academy, she could not hide her identity forever. After a moment of silence, he said mockingly, She is Tang's sister. Chen Pippi waved his hand generously and said, So what? Ning Ke reminded him again, Tang, 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 the Tang who lies in the hot water. Chen Pippi was very confused. Ning Ke sighed and said, Tang from the Devil's Doctrine. Chen Pippi then came to his senses. He pointed at Tang Xiaotong and could not say anything for a long time. I remember that you said that there was no girl stronger than you. I wished that the girl you liked would have the fiercest brother in the world. Now it seems that both conditions have been met. And I have to remind you of one thing. Yi Hong Yu said that if you were to fight, you would not be this little girl's match. Ning Ke patted him on the shoulder to express his most sincere comfort. Tang Xiaotong did not understand what the two were talking about. She was only interested in Chen Pippi, the fat man. She did not understand why Yi Hong Yu thought that he was an absolute loser in terms of fighting when he was the youngest cultivation genius to enter the knowing destiny state. He could not even beat her. She smiled and introduced herself. I am Tang Xiaotong. Chen Pippi looked at the girl from the Devil's Doctrine and said after a moment of silence, I am Chen Pippi. Tang Xiaotong felt that her brother had mentioned this name before. She lowered her head and thought for a while. Finally, she remembered and said happily, I remember now. You are Yi Su's younger brother. Chen Pippi said after a moment of silence, Yes, I am. Although there are differences between the Taoists and the Devil's Doctrine, and the abbey and the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine are irreconcilable, I should kill you right now. But since this is the academy and you are brought here by the headmaster, you can rest assured that I will not do anything to you for now. Tang Xiaotong's childish face was full of excitement. She looked at him and said happily, It doesn't matter. How about we fight first? I have always wanted to fight with you. Chen Pippi looked at her face, and could not help but think of his miserable childhood in the abbey many years ago. He thought of the little girl who liked to wear red dresses and fight with him. He was silent and then began to feel sad and angry. At this moment, a clear sound of flute came from the distant mountains. The mountain was really big. Ning Ke had studied in the back mountain of the academy for a long time, but he had only been to some places. It was the first time for him to see the hut where the disciples of the academy gathered today. The hut was very big and was made of beams and pillars. There were no walls on all sides and it was very spacious. Fortunately, it was located in the deep valley of the back mountain, so it did not feel cold. No one knew where the frost-white grass on the eaves came from. There was a row of bamboo chairs in front of the hut, on which sat Sang Sang and Tang Xiaotong. A frightened little white wolf was hiding under the chair, and a big black horse was panting behind the chair. No one knew when the silly horse finally got rid of the big white goose and hurried to find the second mistress in his heart. Sang Sang sat on the chair and looked at some flowers in her hands. She was bored and spaced out. Tang Xiaotong kicked the stone in front of the chair and spaced out. Suddenly she turned to Sang Sang and said with a smile, Hello, I am Tang Xiaotong. Sang Sang said, Hello, I just heard you say that. Tang Xiaotong continued, I am from the wilderness, and I am going to study in the academy. Sang Sang was stunned and said softly, I am Sang Sang, Ning Ke's handmaiden, and I am from in the past. She did not know where her home was, whether it was Min Mountain, the city of Wei, or the Hebei County where Ning Ke found her. But now she suddenly remembered that she was born in Chang'an, so she did not know why she was happy. I am from Chang'an, and I am not going to study in the academy. I heard that the West Hill Divine Palace wants me to study there, but I don't want to go either. So I don't know what they want me to do here today. If it were other female cultivators who heard Sang Sang say that the West Hill Divine Palace wanted her to study there, their first reaction would be disbelief, and then ridicule. However, Tang Xiaotang chose to believe it without hesitation and said, "You did the right thing. The West Hill Divine Palace is not interesting." Then she stretched out her hand and said brightly, "Since we know each other, we are friends." Sang Sang was not used to this enthusiasm, but after thinking for a while, she nodded seriously. Suddenly, there was a fierce argument in the hut without walls. Sang Sang was still looking down at the flowers in her hands. Tang Xiaotang looked over there and murmured, "Is the academy really not accepting people from the Enlightenment doctrine?" The headmaster returned to the academy. Everyone in the back of the mountain was there. Even the scholar was hugging a book and leaning against the pillar to read. There were two extremely fierce debates in the hut today. The first was Chun Pippi's indignant objection to Tang Xiaotang entering the academy, but he was ruthlessly suppressed by second brother. The second was Ning Kei's deep self-reflection on his excessive drinking last night, but he was ruthlessly suppressed by second brother when he tried to defend himself. However, what really shocked the disciples in the back of the mountain was what happened next. The headmaster looked at Ning Kei and said slowly, "You are a student that I have never seen before. But since you could pass all the tests I set and reach the peak, no matter what Jun Mo and Pippi did in the process, you have succeeded. So I will admit that you are my student." Somehow, Ning Kei always felt that something terrible was going to happen. Although the trip to the wilderness did not make the academy lose too much face, especially the fight between the two kids from the judicial department of the Divine Hall, you were still impulsive and did not behave properly. In my opinion, there are still some problems with your temperament, so the ceremony will be held later. In the following period of time, you should reflect on yourself. This is your punishment. Ning Kei asked, "Teacher, how should I reflect?" The headmaster said indifferently, "I will punish you to seclude yourself in the cliff. You can come out when you have thought it through." Hearing that Ning Kei would be punished to seclude himself in the cliff, the disciples in the back of the mountain looked at the headmaster in shock. They could not understand why the headmaster would make such a decision, because they knew very well what the back cliff meant to the academy. They also knew how difficult it was to come out after entering the back cliff. Why was the headmaster so harsh, or even cruel to youngest brother? In chapter 176, Ning Kei shamelessly bumped into the winter grass. When I was writing, I thought of Yi Tianxing running wildly in the rape flower field in the Vermilion Bird story. I am recalling my previous feelings and explaining the regret I mentioned at the end of the last chapter. I regret that I had to fulfill the 180,000 words promise. Thinking of it, I trembled all over. It was not because I saw a beauty, not because I was cold, not because I was excited, but because I was afraid. Today is the third chapter. Because my leader is sick, I haven't washed the dishes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 375. The academy had the back mountain, and there was a cliff behind the mountain. Except for Ning Kei, everyone in the back mountain had been to the cliff. They had been shocked by the peerless scenery of the cliff, and it was because they were too shocked that they rarely went there. To them, the cliff was not a dangerous place, but they knew very well that going there to see the sea of clouds and waterfalls and seclusion in the cliff were two different things. Because the last person who was imprisoned in the back cliff of the academy was the youngest uncle who had once shocked the world. Now, except for the people in the back mountain, no one was willing or dared to mention him. They knew the story of the youngest uncle's seclusion in the cliff of the back mountain, and they knew how much perseverance and talent it took to break out of there. So when they heard that Ning Ke was going to the back cliff to meditate in seclusion, everyone showed a look of disbelief on their faces. It was difficult for them to accept that their youngest brother would face such a trial. There was dead silence in the hut. The disciples in the back mountain had mixed emotions. They obviously did not agree with the headmaster's punishment of Ning Ke, but no one dared to speak, because the headmaster in the chair slowly closed his eyes. Except for his tall figure, there was nothing special about the headmaster. Except that he once went to the West Hill to cut off peach blossoms, he did not have many legendary deeds in the world. He even left more marks in the world than his younger brother, Kuhauren. However, people in the cultivation world believed that he was the greatest legend in the past 1,000 years. For the people in the hut, the headmaster was their respected and feared teacher. So they could not understand or agree with the headmaster's punishment of their youngest brother, but they did not know what to do. At this moment, Chen Pippi nervously rubbed his hands and walked to Ning Ke's side. He bowed to the headmaster in the chair and said in a trembling voice, "Teacher, isn't it a little too heavy?" Before Ning Ke entered the academy, Chen Pippi was the youngest student on the second floor of the academy. He was the most favored by the headmaster other than the eldest brother. According to past habits, only he could stand up and say a few words at this time. Since last spring, although Ning Ke had gone to the wilderness and did not stay in the back mountain for a long time, all the senior brothers and senior sisters in the back mountain liked this new younger brother very much. Now that Chen Pippi had plucked up the courage to speak, the rest of the senior brothers also came forward to plead for Ning Quebec's seventh sister Mu Yu walked to the back of the headmaster of the academy and massaged his back. Baigong Wei Yang and Shimen Buhua sighed sadly and talked about the steep cliff at the back of the mountain. Fifth brother and eighth brother tried to interrupt the conversation. Everyone tried all kinds of ways to make the headmaster happy, hoping that the headmaster would take back his decision of punishment. The 11th brother, Wang Qi, did not go forward to circle around the master. He looked at the master and thought for a long time. Then he asked very seriously, "If there is no thing, then there is no heart. If there is no skin, then there is no hair. If there is no flower, then there is no color. If there is no sin, then there is no punishment. I don't know what sin master has committed by punishing the youngest brother so heavily." Wang Qi had always been a man of few words and only liked to talk with flowers. At this time, he actually expressed his opinion on the headmaster's punishment. It could be imagined that everyone was very worried about the outcome of Ning Ke being imprisoned in the back cliff. The second brother had always attached great importance to etiquette and was very particular about respecting the master. However, at this time, he glanced at the 11th brother, Wang Qi, and did not scold him. Instead, he looked at the headmaster of the academy and reported slowly, "Master, I have thought about the rules of the academy. Younger brother has not committed any sin that is worthy of such a heavy punishment." At the corner of the hut, the third sister, Yu Lian, stopped writing the hairpin-style small regular script. She glanced at the headmaster and then at Ning Ke thoughtfully. The people in the back mountain of the academy kept persuading the headmaster of the academy, but the headmaster of the academy still sat quietly in the chair with his eyes closed. The eldest brother looked at the headmaster quietly. Suddenly, he took 2 steps forward and bowed deeply. At this step, the hut suddenly became quiet again. The disciples in the back mountain were silent and then returned to their respective positions. They looked at the eldest brother nervously and hopefully. The headmaster of the academy slowly opened his eyes and looked at him in surprise. He said, "You also have something to say?" The eldest brother straightened up and said seriously, "Of course, there is a deeper meaning behind the teacher's action. I can vaguely guess some of it. However, youngest brother hasn't been in the sect for long. Although he had a fortuitous encounter in the wilderness and his cultivation realm improved rapidly, how can he be compared with youngest uncle?" The second brother frowned slightly and also thought of the story. He shook his head and said, "Master, what the eldest brother said makes sense. What if younger brother still can't figure it out after 10 years? What should we do then? The headmaster of the academy looked at the two disciples who had been with him since they were young and the begging children around the hut. He raised his long eyebrows slightly and said, "If he can't figure it out, he should never come out. I have never believed in lucky chance. However, since he has accepted the lucky chance, he needs to solve it himself." The headmaster of the academy's eyes were very calm. He only slowly glanced at the crowd, but everyone felt that the headmaster's gaze had always been on them. There was an indisputable majesty in his calmness. The crowd subconsciously lowered their heads and dared not to plead for Ninquebec. The hut was as quiet as a dead pond. Ning Ke had heard Chun Pippi mention the back cliff of the academy's back mountain once. At that time, he did not care much about it. Even when he heard that the headmaster of the academy wanted to punish him by isolating him in the back cliff, he was not too shocked. He thought that since he was in isolation, there would be a day when he would come out. Perhaps the headmaster of the academy wanted to take this opportunity to sharpen his mind and give him another lucky chance. However, looking at the senior brothers and sisters' reactions, and even the eldest brother and the second brother's solemn expressions, he realized that being imprisoned in the back cliff was a terrible punishment. Especially when he heard the second brother say that the headmaster of the academy would never come out after 10 years, he suddenly felt a chill. It was said that everything in the human world was cultivation. However, cultivation in the human world and cultivation in a lonely and cold cell were two different things. No matter how great the lucky chance was, he could not accept being imprisoned in the back mountain's cliff for 10 years or even for a lifetime, even if he had to die. Ning Ke lowered his head and thought of the miserable future of being imprisoned for a lifetime. His body was as cold as falling into an ice cellar. He could not figure out what he had done to deserve such a punishment. However, when he raised his head, there was no anger or unwillingness on his face, because he knew that those emotions were useless in front of the headmaster of the academy. He just asked seriously, "Teacher, what do I need to do to understand?" The headmaster of the academy said, "If you understand, then you understand." If he thought it through, then he would understand. No matter how he thought about it, this sentence sounded like nonsense. Ning Ke thought of the scene when he could not understand his snow mountain and ocean of chi. He thought of the scene when he was meditating on the talisman and vaguely understood some things. After a moment of silence, he said, "Then how can I prove that I have understood?" The headmaster of the academy said, "You will understand when you understand." Ning Ke looked at him and said, "I think there must be a standard." The headmaster of the academy looked at his little disciple in front of him and saw the hidden determination on his calm face. His eyes suddenly brightened like the dew on a pine branch, reflecting the morning light. "Of course there is a standard. Who will determine the standard? Teacher, you? The standard is already there. Teacher, but I can't stay in the back cliff for a long time. His Majesty still wants to see me. I still have to learn how to manage the array in Chang'an. In a few days, it will be my teacher Yen Sei's 100-day sacrifice. I have to kowtow there. How about I stay in seclusion for 8 days every 10 days? Hearing Ning Ke's words, the headmaster of the academy's eyes became brighter and brighter. The dew gradually turned into a pool of water. In the pool of water, there was a clear but unknown smile. The smile was so strong that it seemed to overflow. Suddenly, the smile in the headmaster's eyes disappeared. He looked at Ning Ke and said slowly, "Last night on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes, did you say that you were an indifferent person?" "I was originally an indifferent person in Crouching Dragon Mound," Ning Ke murmured. The headmaster of the academy said, "I don't know where Crouching Dragon Mound is, but I know what indifferent means." Ning Ke understood this sentence and looked up at the white grass hanging from the eaves of the hut. He knew that a person like the headmaster of the academy would definitely not be angry with his student because of the dispute on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes. Then why did he lock him in the back mountain? Was it because he joined the devil? Youngest uncle was punished by heaven and died. His reputation and body were annihilated in the wilderness and were never heard of again. Could it be that the headmaster of the academy wanted to lock him, the disciple who had inherited youngest uncle's great spirit, in the back mountain because of that old matter? Was it for the academy's righteous reputation or for other reasons? His thoughts were in a mess, and the things that Ning Ke had just figured out suddenly became blurry again. The great spirit in his chest and abdomen moved at will, like a knife going straight up, piercing his throat until it was dry. He said in a hoarse voice, "Teacher, turns out to be an unreasonable person." Hearing this, the people in the back mountain of the academy in the hut were shocked. Second brother looked unhappy and eldest brother sighed slowly. Although the headmaster of the academy usually got along well with the students and teachers, a teacher was a teacher. Under such a serious situation, who dared to question or even criticize him like Ning Ke? The headmaster of the academy was not angry. He said, "Didn't you say that your teacher was the most unreasonable person in the building of pines and cranes?" Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, "Teacher, please allow me to talk to my handmaiden before going to the back cliff." The headmaster of the academy said, "No need. You still have to eat on the back cliff. I asked you to bring your handmaiden here to serve you. You can bring her to the back cliff later." Ning Ke finally understood why the headmaster of the academy asked him to bring Sang Sang to see him. It turned out that the headmaster of the academy had already prepared to lock him in the back mountain. He suddenly thought of something. With Sang Sang's temperament, she would definitely not leave the back cliff alone if he was imprisoned there. In fact, both of them would be imprisoned together. If he was imprisoned at the back cliff for the rest of his life, would Sang Sang also be imprisoned there? Thinking of this, the sharp and straightforward Great Spirit rushed into his chest like a knife. He could no longer control his emotions. He angrily looked at the headmaster of the academy in the chair and clenched his fists. However, he did nothing but looked at the headmaster of the academy quietly. He took a deep breath and forced himself to swallow it. Then he said calmly, "Yes, teacher." The headmaster of the academy looked at the youngest disciple in front of him, who was also his last disciple. He quietly looked at him for a long time. He looked at him thinking hard, looking at him dejectedly accepting his fate, looking at him unable to suppress his anger, looking at him gradually becoming bolder, looking at him calming down, looking at him calming down, looking at him returning to normal. Ha, 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 ha. The headmaster of the academy suddenly raised his head and laughed. Then he stood up from the chair and brushed his black robe. Without saying anything to the disciples, he walked out of the hut desolately. Walking out of the hut, the old man looked at the golden orchid tree that the two of them had planted many years ago. Looking at the dense green leaves on the tree, the old man sighed with both joy and regret. There are indeed no two leaves in the world that are exactly the same. Then how can there be two people that are exactly the same? Note: in the world of Nightfall, there is a tree called the Golden Orchid Tree. Also, this is the first chapter. If you don't eat, try to finish the second chapter by 8:45. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 376. Looking at the back of the headmaster walking towards the waterfall, eldest brother and second brother vaguely understood something. However, they still thought that the headmaster's punishment of imprisoning youngest brother on the cliff at the back of the mountain was too harsh. Although it was said that one could be reborn in a dead end, not everyone could be like youngest uncle. Yulien tidied up the ink and paper on the table, and walked out of the hut. She stopped when she passed by Ning Ke and said softly, "Since the teacher's decision can't be changed, bring your handmaiden and follow the teacher. Don't let the teacher wait for too long." Ning Ke was also looking at the figure of the headmaster in the distance. He prayed that the headmaster would forget about him after a few laughs so that he could avoid this calamity. However, after listening to third sister's words, he realized that it was just wishful thinking. He sighed with a bitter smile and followed her out of the hut to the bamboo chair. Senior sister Yulian said to Tang Xiaotang, "Come with me. I'll arrange a place for you." Tang Xiaotang nodded happily and waved goodbye to Sang Sang. She said, "It seems that I will stay in the academy in the future. Come and play with me then." Sang Sang nodded. Tang Xiaotang followed Yulian to the cliff plateau happily. She was jumping happily like a restless stone, while Yulian was as quiet and tranquil as a delicate tree. The two girls were quite different in age. They were both petite, but their breaths were completely different. However, they seemed to be very harmonious when they were together. Ning Ke withdrew his gaze and looked at Sang Sang in front of him. He said with a smile, "The headmaster of the academy was very happy to see me and decided to teach me some secret cultivation methods of the academy. I guess I will be cultivating in seclusion in the back mountain these days. You go back to the old brush pen shop, and I will go back to the city as soon as I finish my business." The headmaster had asked him to bring Sang Sang to the back of the mountain of the academy in case he needed someone to take care of him after he was imprisoned. However, Ning Ke was not willing to let Sang Sang be trapped on the cliff with him. Sang Sang looked at him and said softly, "You were talking too loudly in the room, and young master, you know that my ears are very good, so I heard everything." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said, "Yes, I was punished by my teacher and imprisoned in the back cliff for seclusion. I don't know when I can come out." Sang Sang looked at him and said worriedly, "What should we do?" Ning Ke looked at her. She shook her head and said, "I definitely want to be with you." After thinking for a while, Ning Ke said, "Let's see how it goes first. If I'm trapped at the back cliff for too long, you can go back to the Grand Secretary's mansion first. I don't think anyone will stop you." Sang Sang said nothing. He looked at the distant mountain path stretching into the dense forest under the waterfall. The headmaster's floating figure was about to disappear. After a moment of silence, he led Sang Sang in that direction. When the cottage disappeared behind them, Sang Sang looked around and pulled his sleeve. She whispered, "Is it because you have joined the diabolism that the academy wants to lock you up?" Ning Ke said, "In the wilderness, eldest brother should have already guessed what happened after I learned the great spirit of youngest uncle, so the headmaster must have already known it. However, I'm not sure if the headmaster's punishment has anything to do with this. He didn't mention it in the hut." There was a crooked old plum tree by the side of the road. The plum tree passed by Sang Sang's dark face, making her look more nervous. She lowered her voice and said, "The headmaster said that you are the son of Yama." Ning Ke said angrily, "Don't mention your cheating headmaster." "I said I'm not." Sang Sang said worriedly, "But the academy wants to lock you up. Is it related to this?" Ning Ke didn't want to admit this inference, but his heart became heavy. With a heavy heart, his footsteps became heavier. Ning Ke didn't know what was waiting for him at the back cliff. He subconsciously held Sang Sang's hand and walked forward in silence, very slowly. On the mountain path ahead, the black robe fluttered in the wind. Sometimes it disappeared into the dense forest, and sometimes it appeared beside the silver waterfall. The headmaster seemed to be walking very fast, but he always stayed in their sight. After bypassing second brother's courtyard and walking for a while, they approached the silver waterfall. The sound of the waterfall was like thunder in the surrounding forest, and the air was filled with tiny pieces of water particles, which formed a cool mist, making it refreshing to breathe. Ning Ke's breathing became a little rapid. He wanted to hold Sang Sang's hand and turn around to leave, but he knew that it was a delusion. Even if they really escaped from the academy, it would mean that all the hard work over these years would be in vain, and he and Sang Sang would return to their gloomy lives. Following the fluttering black robe, the two came to the bottom of the waterfall. There was a quiet pool under the waterfall. There was no water outlet facing the cliff platform, and it seemed that it was not connected to Mirror Lake. The overflowing pool water flowed along the low-lying rocks in front of them on the right. Ning-Ke held Song Song's hand and stepped on the rock. They followed the direction of the water flow and walked forward. Together with the gurgling water, they walked into a deep valley. The valley was very narrow, no more than 100 feet high, and the giant rocks above touched each other. In fact, it was more like a naturally formed giant cave. The air in the cave was moist and slightly cold, and the walls were covered with moss. The water from the quiet pool flowed through the rocks at the bottom of the cave, forming a picture like a paddy field. In front of the valley was a clear blue sky, cut into an oval like a blue porcelain plate, very beautiful. Ning-Ke and Sang-Sang stepped on the stones in the paddy field, walking toward the blue. As they walked, the valley suddenly narrowed, and the water between the rocks suddenly became turbulent. With a rustling sound, white waves gradually appeared, and the moss on the rocks shook violently. Walking out of the canyon, there was a precipice in front of them. The turbulent water was jumping and rushing towards the edge of the cliff. The blue sky was cut into two halves by the cliff, and the middle line was this water line. Sang-Sang held Ning-Ke's hand tightly and looked at the scenery in front of her, speechless. The winding path led to a secluded place, and in the end, there was a desperate situation. The mountain wind whistled. Standing by the cliff and the waterfall, they could not hear any sound, as if there was an endless abyss under the cliff. The abyss could not be seen. There was nothing in front of Ning-Ke except the sky and the cliff. The cliff extended endlessly to the sky and on both sides, as if it was the Gobi Desert to the north of the West Palace in the grassland, but this Gobi Desert was in the sky. Compared with the boundless cliffs and precipices, the gorge where they were at was just an inconspicuous small gap, and the waterfall was just a thin line. Ning-Ke looked at the cliff in the distance, and saw that there were more than 10 waterfalls falling down the precipices. They were of different heights and distances, and looked very beautiful. Vast cliffs, blue skies, and over a dozen waterfalls that were as thin as threads combined to form an extremely vast world. Even the most powerful person would feel insignificant in front of these scenes. Ning-Ke carefully took a step to the side of the cliff, holding Song Song's hand and bending down to look. He saw the bottom of the cliff covered with clouds and mist, and did not know how deep it was. The more than 10 waterfalls on the cliff fell into the clouds like a bunch of pillars, splashing circles of clouds, and then disappeared silently, as if there was a world under the clouds that did not belong to the human world. The cliff behind the back of the mountain of the academy was a beautiful new world. However, the beauty of this place could easily make people feel shocked and helpless. Standing on the edge of the cliff, Ning-Ke looked down at the clouds and watched the waterfalls fall into the clouds. He did not have any feeling of floating in the air, because the clouds formed and gathered, and the waterfalls fell into the clouds without the sound of water. Instead, he felt some kind of fear. Thinking of the way he came, he was sure that this should be the west side of the mountain. No wonder he had never seen such a cliff on the official road from Chang unto the academy in the past 2 years. The cliff seemed to be too steep to climb, but in fact there was a very narrow stone path hidden in it. Ning-Ke looked up and saw the figure of the headmaster gliding between the cliffs, sometimes in the east, sometimes in the west. No matter how hard he looked, he could not determine which part of the cliff he was on. Ning-Ke held Song Song's hand and began to walk up. The two had lived in Min Mountain since childhood, so they had their own ways of climbing cliffs and turned a blind eye to the cliff and the sky under their feet. The higher they went up the cliff, the less green there was. There was no quiet lake, no hut, no laughter, and no ancient pine chessboard. It was a completely different world from the other side of the mountain. This cliff silently, or perhaps indifferently, looked at the sky on the other side for who knew how many tens of thousands of years. At the end of the narrow stone path, there finally appeared a small cliff yard. There was a very simple hut on the edge of the cliff, and there was a cave on the cliff. The headmaster sat on the edge of the cliff, looking into the distance, thinking about something. Ning Ke walked behind the headmaster and looked out of the cliff. His gaze fell on Chang'an City beyond the sea of clouds. The sun was setting, and the golden sunlight shone on the black and cyan city wall, reflecting a very solemn and sacred luster. That was the most magnificent city in the world, and it was the most perfect masterpiece of mankind. Ning Ke looked at Chang'an City in the twilight, and for a moment, all kinds of feelings welled up in his heart. He could not speak for a long time. After a long time, he softly sighed. Chang'an City is really beautiful at this time. The headmaster said, Chang'an City has always been beautiful. Ning Ke said, those who built Chang'an City must have been great. The headmaster opened the food box beside him, took out a small urn, and filled a cup with wine. He casually said, those who built the city are not great, because there needs to be people to guard the city. Ning Ke was stunned. The headmaster drank up the wine in his cup, picked up a piece of lamb soaked in scallion oil, and ate it. He looked at Chang'an City in the distance and laughed happily, as if he could not get tired of looking at it. Chang'an City was shrouded in the twilight. The headmaster looked at Chang'an City in the twilight. He looked at his own Chang'an City. Looking at the back of the headmaster, an indescribable feeling welled up in Ning Ke's heart. The negative feelings and doubts in his heart were all dispelled by the scene in front of him. Looking down from the clouds, looking down from the outside world. What kind of feeling is that? Teacher, are you guarding this city, the Tang Empire, or the whole world? If I were a painter, I would really like to paint the academy, the back of the mountain, and the cliff and waterfall behind the back of the mountain. I think it is really beautiful. This is the second chapter, and the third chapter may be a little later because I have to go for a meal. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 377. In the twilight, the hole in the cliff looked like the open mouth of a monster. Looking at the entrance of the cave, Ning Ke had this feeling in his mind. He knew that this description was too cliché, but he really couldn't find anything more appropriate than this. The cave seemed to be ready to devour everyone, including light, spring, summer, autumn, winter, time, and all the feelings attached to time. Ning Ke felt extremely cold when he thought about how long he would take to get out of this cave. He might be imprisoned in it for a few months, a few years, or even 10 years. He could not see the girls in Chang'an for 10 years, nor eat the hot and sour noodle slice soup for 10 years. How old would the girls in the House of Red Sleeves be after 10 years? Xiao Chao would probably be married. Would Dewdrop go back to her hometown? In fact, Ning Ke might be imprisoned in the back of the mountain for more than 10 years, such as a lifetime. But he, who stood in front of the cave, did not want to think about that. He was a student of the second floor of the academy and a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. After seeing the scene in the twilight, all the dark emotions in his heart disappeared. He trusted the mountain behind the academy and the people in it. However, he had lived a miserable life since he was a child. At the thought of handing over his life and freedom to others, he instinctively began to resist and want to escape. Ning Ke looked back at the headmaster who was eating mutton and drinking by the cliff and asked, "Teacher, why did you lock me up? Is it because of joining the devil or because of something else?" He wanted to ask the headmaster if it was because the divine priest of light thought that he was the son of Yama, so the headmaster punished him and isolated him from the world. But he did not ask. He firmly believed that he had nothing to do with the illusory Yama. But many years ago, because of those illusory legends, there had been a bloody storm. He did not want to have anything to do with this matter. The headmaster did not turn back and asked, "What do you mean by imprisonment?" Ning Ke looked at his back and answered after a moment of silence, "Depriving of freedom." The headmaster said, "Freedom is very precious. Compared with freedom, even life is nothing. Only freedom itself is more precious than freedom." Ning Ke did not understand this sentence. The headmaster put the chopsticks back into the lunchbox, picked up a piece of ginger with his fingers and put it into his mouth, chewing slowly. After a while, he stood up and turned around to look at Ning Kei at the entrance of the cave. He said, "Since freedom itself is more precious than freedom, then there is only one reason to deprive you of your freedom. That is, they want you to have greater freedom. This is a very simple matter." Ning Kei vaguely understood more things and said helplessly, "Teacher, since it's such a simple thing, why didn't you tell me in a simple way?" After saying this, he slowly turned around and looked at the cliff cave in front of him. After a long silence, he took a deep breath and walked inside. The last rays of twilight shone on Chang'an City in the distance, as well as on the desolate cliffs here. The golden red was like the purest flame, and the cliff cave was like an entrance to the unknown in the fire. It was very quiet in the cliff cave. There wasn't even a gust of wind. It was slightly cold and the air was very dry. Ning Kei, who had been hunting and killing for years, instinctively closed his eyes when he walked into the darkness from the bright place. When he opened his eyes again, he was used to the brightness of the environment. The light outside the cliff cave shone in. The cave was not as dark as it looked from the outside, and he could clearly see the natural lines between the stones on the cave walls. Ning Kei suddenly came to his senses. Did he just walk in like this? Was it that simple? He turned around and looked out of the cave. He saw Sang Sang holding a protruding rock at the entrance of the cave, looking at him with a worried face. The headmaster at the edge of the cliff had already begun to pack up the lunchbox and was ready to leave. He was very close to the entrance of the cave, and could even see the last scene of the southern city wall of Chang'an City beyond the clouds. However, once he walked into the cliff cave, Ning Kei felt as if he was abandoned by the real human world outside, and a strong sense of loneliness and fear arose in his heart. "Teacher." Ning Kei looked at the headmaster who was about to leave and asked in a trembling voice, "Is it possible that I will never come out? So many people have pleaded for you, and it seems that you are popular. If you really want to stay here for the rest of your life, I believe that they will come to keep you company. You don't have to worry about being too lonely." The headmaster looked at him saying this, and then walked down the mountain with the lunchbox. The loose black robe on him, under the red glow of the setting sun, looked like a burning bird's wings. Looking at the headmaster's back, Ning Kei revealed a bitter smile. If he was really going to be imprisoned in this cliff cave for the rest of his life, what was the point of being popular? No filial son can be found in bed for a long time, and no one knows you for a long time. No matter how good a friend is, who can accompany you to be imprisoned for the rest of your life? If he really stayed in the cliff cave, he would eventually be forgotten by the world. Of course, there would be someone who would always be with him. Ning Kei looked at Sang Sang outside the cave. Although they were not far apart, he felt that she was far away. He looked at her eyes and said, "If I still can't come out in 3 months, you can go down the mountain." Sang Sang wanted to say something. Ning Kei shook his head and said, "Don't force me to use those sissy methods." Legend had it that those extremely powerful divine talisman masters could draw a ground as a prison. Ning Kei had never seen Master Yen Sei use this method, but he had seen the confinement of the West Hill Divine Palace, the deacon of the judicial department in the tent of the desolate man, and the confinement array drawn by youngest uncle with the Howran sword in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. The entrance of the cliff cave seemed to be empty. Occasionally, a gust of wind blew by, and dust slowly floated in and out of the cave. But Ning Kei knew that there must be something there. The headmaster imprisoned him in this cave and told him that he could only go out after he figured it out. If he figured it out, he could understand everything in the world, and if he figured it out, he could walk out of the cave. His seclusion in the cliff cave could be regarded as a punishment, a tempering of his mind, and a test. Every time he encountered a real test, Ning Kei would calm down as fast as he could and dispel all the anxiety when he was sure that there was no other way. He would never be anxious, but would make the best preparation before he tried to face the test. So he sat down cross-legged, closed his eyes, and began to meditate. The Great Spirit in his body slowly flowed, and began to absorb the aura of heaven and earth around him, according to a certain rhythm. The sun had set at this time, and Chang'an City was shrouded in shadows. People there had probably seen the night ahead of time, but people on the top of the cliff could still enjoy some remaining sunlight. The light shone on his eyelashes, which were as bright as a layer of honey powder. Ning Ke opened his eyes and made sure that he had adjusted himself to the best state, both mentally and physically. He got up and walked to the entrance of the cave slowly and steadily. The last afterglow shrouded the entrance of the cliff cave, and he walked into the afterglow. Suddenly, Ning Ke felt that the air in front of him, including the afterglow in the sky, was stagnant, as if it was as sticky as water with a lot of honey in it, bringing with it a lot of resistance. Especially when he went out of the cave, the invisible resistance was magnified countless times, and in the end it was almost like a swamp, making it difficult for him to breathe and take a step forward. Feeling the obstacle at the entrance of the cave, he did not try to forcibly break through, but retreated back into the cave as fast as he could. It was not until he took 3 steps back that he finally got rid of the sticky invisible force. He slightly gasped for a moment, and then his pale face returned to normal. Sang Sang walked out of the hut by the cliff, holding a lit torch in her hand. With the warm red light of the torch, Ning Ke carefully examined the entrance of the cliff cave. He looked very carefully, including the seemingly natural lines on the wall and even the gravel on the ground. However, he did not find any fluctuation of talisman intent, nor did he see any trace of tactical array. The inhibition of the cliff cave was not a talisman or tactical array, but an aura that appeared out of nowhere. This aura was very simple, but it was incomparably powerful. It was like the purest wine, but it was extremely strong. The aura of heaven and earth between the cliffs was called to the entrance of the cave by this aura in a way that he could not understand. With such a large amount of aura of heaven and earth blocking the small cave entrance, it could be imagined how much it was compressed. It was so thick and condensed that it had even exceeded a certain boundary, directly causing some kind of qualitative change, which made the invisible chi of heaven and earth become a substantial obstacle. Sang Sang held the torch and looked into the cave, shouting, "Young master, how is it? Can you do it? It's not that easy to find a way out." Ning Ke shook his head, looking at her holding the torch, and suddenly said, "Step aside." Sang Sang struggled to insert the torch into the ground outside the cave entrance, and returned to the hut by the cliff. Looking at the entrance of the cliff cave, Ning Ke thought that if the inhibition of the cave entrance was some kind of complicated tactical array or a divine talisman, he really could not do anything with his current state. However, the inhibition here was directly condensed by the strong aura of the chi of heaven and earth, which was more like a substantial barrier. For cultivators, the amount of chi of heaven and earth condensed by this inhibition was too much, and it could even directly affect their psyche power to control the chi of heaven and earth. But for Ning Ke, this inhibition seemed to have some kind of loophole, because he did not need to mobilize the chi of heaven and earth. After inheriting the youngest uncle's great spirit and joining the devil, Ning Ke's body became stronger and stronger. As long as the barrier was tangible, he should be able to use brute force to break through. The more he thought about it, the brighter his eyes became, and he felt that this method seemed feasible. Ning Ke looked at the entrance of the cliff cave, thinking of the shocked faces of his senior brothers and sisters, and the ugly face of the headmaster when he rushed out and took Sang Sang down the mountain. He became more and more excited. The Great Spirit silently flowed, instilling into the smallest part of his body. Staring at the entrance of the cave, Ning Ke slightly bent his knees and gradually lifted his heels. With a snap, his left foot fiercely kicked the hard ground, and a clear footprint appeared on the hard ground. With the huge recoil force, his whole body whistled through the air, and suddenly rushed to the entrance of the cave like an arrow. There was a muffled groan from the entrance of the cliff cave. A figure, like a wild goose shot through the neck by an arrow, flew miserably and fell to the ground miserably. Ning Ke fell heavily on the ground, embarrassed. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and the blood fell like rain on the footprint he had just left. This is the 3rd chapter. The 4th chapter must be written before 2:45. I want to watch the game. I want to watch the game today. Besides, I have to admit that Ronaldo is indeed one of the 2 best players in the world, although I still prefer Little White. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 378. Under the red light of the torch, the blood stains on the footprints were like ink spots. Looking at that spot, Ning Ke's face turned pale, and he found that he had been shaken back to his original place by the inhibition at the entrance of the cave. The shoe on his left foot had been smashed into a cotton-like thing. He tore it off and struggled to sit up. Looking at the entrance of the cave that had been shrouded in darkness, his eyes could not help showing a trace of fear. Previously, when he violently crashed into the entrance of the cave, just at the moment when he was about to hit the inhibition, the thick and sticky chi of heaven and earth seemed to have sensed something and suddenly became violent. It turned into a terrifying ocean and directly rolled up his consciousness and body. Ning Ke had never been to the Kingdom of Song and had never seen the famous Sea of Storms. But he believed that even the real Sea of Storms was not as terrible as the ocean that he had fallen into. The ocean that was condensed by the thick chi of heaven and earth was shaking violently both on the surface and at the bottom. Thousands of huge whirlpools made it impossible for him to react or struggle, and he directly sank into the depths of the sea. The omnipresent pressure in the depths of the primordial chi ocean turned into countless extremely thin needles, piercing his clothes and skin, and then directly into his body. The seemingly strong Great Spirit in Ning Ke's body was like a candle in this violent ocean. It was instantly extinguished and scattered by those thin needles. The pain brought by those countless thin needles directly destroyed the protection of his sense of perception by his psyche power, which made him extremely painful. In the end, the violent ocean turned up a wave and easily knocked him back to the shore. He could feel that the wave was at most 1/10,000th of the power of the ocean, but it seemed to be more powerful than the fist of Xiaoho he had met on the shore of the Hulun Sea in the wilderness. Hearing the noise, Sang Sang hurriedly ran out of the hut and saw Ning Ke falling on the ground by the light of the torch. She was shocked and without thinking, she ran into the cliff cave. Ning Ke forcibly swallowed the blood that rushed to his throat and shouted, "Don't come in!" Since childhood they had lived a difficult life. In order to survive, they had long cultivated a tacit understanding between them. No matter what situation they encountered, Sang Sang would always unconditionally carry out Ning Ke's advice. This had become a kind of instinct. Therefore, after hearing this shout, Sang Sang did not come in no matter how worried she was. She leaned against the stone wall and looked at the pale Ning Quebec. She asked in a trembling voice, "How is it?" Ning Ke put his left foot on his right knee, closed his eyes and began to meditate. The Great Spirit slowly circulated in his body. After confirming that there were no major problems with the Sea of Consciousness, Ocean of Snow, Ocean of Chi, and the cyclone in his lower abdomen, especially after confirming that the violent ocean did not destroy the Great Spirit in his body, he was slightly relieved and said in a low voice, "It's okay. I won't die." He had been injured too many times in his life, and Sang Sang had seen him get injured too many times. As long as he didn't die, the two of them wouldn't take it too seriously. As long as he didn't die, he would be fine. After the severely shaken sense of perception gradually calmed down, Ning Ke stood up and slowly walked to the entrance of the cliff cave. He stretched out his hand and pressed it gently in the air. His palm suddenly felt sluggish. It did not feel like water, but more like a bag filled with water, soft but unbreakable. Why didn't I sense the existence of the restriction when I walked in? He looked at the entrance of the cliff cave and thought about the magic of the restriction. No wonder his senior brothers and senior sisters were so shocked during the day. If he wanted to break out of the restriction, he was afraid that it would take a long time. After confirming that it would be a long process, he gradually calmed down and prepared for a long battle. After a moment of silence, he looked at Sang Sang and said with a smile, "Anyway, we have to eat first. Otherwise, we will starve to death before we die of old age. Let's go and see if there is anything to eat in the hut." He wanted to make Sang Sang feel more relaxed with this joke. But at this time, his face was pale, his expression was gloomy, his smile was forced, and there was blood on his chest. How could Sang Sang feel relaxed? "There is rice, vegetables, and meat in the hut. I don't know when it was prepared. I have steamed the rice before, but the water in the tank can only last for 10 days at most. I don't know where to fetch water." Sang Sang reported the current situation to him, and then walked back to the hut to prepare dinner. The cliff was silent, the stars were shining in the night sky, and the clouds were faintly visible under the cliff. It seemed that this place was no longer in the human world, and it was lonely and desolate. Ning Ke leaned against the stone wall at the entrance of the cave and looked at the night view in front of the cliff. He was a little depressed. Although he knew that the headmaster must have a reason to imprison him here, he still felt a little resentful and unwilling. He thought that he had done nothing wrong. Why was he imprisoned in this damn place like the Repent Cliff? He heard the sound of water on the right front. He looked over and saw Sang Sang squatting on the edge of the cliff, washing vegetables. The little girl probably had no concept of the cliff scenery or the concept of human insignificance. After washing vegetables, she naturally poured the water mixed with sand in the basin directly down the cliff. Perhaps only Sang Sang could ignore such a steep and terrifying precipice and focus on washing vegetables on the edge of the cliff. He wondered if the white clouds at the bottom of the cliff would feel the same when they were drenched by a basin of vegetable washing water as when they were drenched by a clear waterfall. Ning Ke quietly looked at Sang Sang's figure and thought that he was lucky that he would not hear any *T mountain songs, and he did not need to worry that she would splash him like the vegetable washing water. The food was ready. Although the ingredients were simple, the fragrance was still carried into the cliff cave by the mountain wind. Ning Ke used a stone to draw a deep line at the entrance of the cliff cave. While Sang Sang was cooking, he slowly felt it with his palm many times and finally determined the scope of triggering the inhibition. Sang Sang put a large bowl of hot food on the ground outside the cave. Then she took a piece of firewood and carefully pushed the bowl over the line according to Ning Ke's guidance. This inhibition really doesn't care about dead things. Otherwise, I would starve to death. Ning Ke held up the bowl of rice with vegetables and bacon and said happily. The two of them held the hot food and sat on the ground facing each other for dinner, just like they usually did in the old brush pen shop. The only difference was that they were separated by a table, but now they were separated by a line. The line was very short, but it divided the two worlds of the cave and the cliff plateau. Ning Ke was inside and Sang Sang was outside. Fortunately, they were together after all. The cliff faced the west and the terrain was extremely high. Without the cover of the tactical array of the academy and surrounded by green trees, the mountain wind was extremely strong. Especially at night, the cold wind whistled back and forth and the cliff plateau suddenly became cold. The food in Ning Ke's bowl was still warm, but the bowl in Sang Sang's hand had already become cold. She subconsciously shrank and wanted to lean to Ning Ke, but did not dare to cross the line. Looking at the little girl's shivering and cold appearance, Ning Ke thought of the fairy tale again. His mood and eyes became cold along with the temperature of the cliff plateau. He thought that Sang Sang had been suffering from coldness since she was a child and could not stand such torture. Thinking of this, his hatred for the headmaster of the academy suddenly came back and he cursed in a low voice. Just when he was about to find a way to trick Sang Sang to go down the mountain, he suddenly heard footsteps on the stone path below the cliff plateau. Although he had been imprisoned for less than half a day, Ning Ke unexpectedly became happy when he heard the footstep. He shouted, "Which brother is so kind to come to see me?" Suddenly, he understood how the monkey felt when he was trapped under the mountain. In the night, eldest brother clasped his hands behind his back and second brother carried a load and walked up the cliff plateau. Eldest brother was very relaxed, but second brother's load was very heavy, as if he were carrying two small mountains. When he took out the things from the load, he found that it was all-inclusive, including water, rice, vegetables, firewood, meat, wine, books, chess, zither, and even 2 old hens. Sang Sang carried the 2 old hens back to the hut happily, thinking that she could make chicken soup for her young master. He just vomited so much blood and really needed nourishment. Ning Ke looked at the clucking old hens in her hands and was shocked. He sighed and said, "Senior brother, you are really generous. I don't know how you carried such a steep mountain. Why do you carry so many things? It seems that you really want me to live in this cave for several years?" Although second brother was the most powerful person in the world, he was not a professional porter after all. It was a bit hard for him to carry the load all the way. He did not answer Ning Ke's sigh, but took out a handkerchief from his sleeve and carefully wiped the sweat on his neck. Then he straightened the crown on his head and looked at Ning Ke seriously. He said, "Younger brother, you have to wake up. This is definitely not a matter of 10 days or half a month." Ning Ke thought that second brother was really not a qualified visitation, and he did not even know how to say auspicious words. A bonfire was lit on the cliff plateau. Sang Sang was dozing off in a deerskin coat. This coat was sent by senior sister Yulian and was just the right size. The fire shone on eldest brother's old coat, as if it was a broken lantern, and second brother's high crown, as if it was a lonely peak with a single tree growing on it. Ning Ke sat in the cave and could not help laughing at this scene. He pointed at second brother's high crown and said, "It really looks like a piece of firewood." Second brother asked, "What's so funny? Why is it funny?" "I won't tell you." Ning Ke said with a smile, "Second brother, in fact, everyone thinks the high crown on your head is very funny. But no one told you because they were afraid that you would be angry." Second brother frowned slightly and said unhappily, "Don't talk nonsense. If you are afraid that I will be angry, why do you dare to tell me now?" Ning Ke pointed at the line in front of him and laughed. He said, "Because I can't get out of the cave and you can't get in either. I thought for a long time and finally came up with this benefit. How can I not use it?" Eldest brother looked at the two and smiled without saying anything. He thought that Mo would probably not continue to be so boring after meeting such a person like youngest brother. The bonfire crackled. Second brother brewed tea and poured 4 cups. The first cup was sent to eldest brother respectfully, and the second cup was placed in front of Sang Sang. Then he flicked his index finger and the third cup of tea was thrown into the cave. The black teacup fell in front of Ning Ke and stopped after spinning 3 times. Not a single drop of tea spilled out. Second brother attached great importance to etiquette and rules, so he was particular about the order of serving tea. He served the elder or the virtuous first, and then the young. As for the third cup, he gave it to Ning Ke because he was in prison. Ning Ke thanked him and raised the cup to his nose to sniff it. He did not drink it and suddenly asked in a low voice, "If I really can't get out, then I really can't get out?" Sang Sang is washing vegetables in the precipice. If you want to talk about whether Jiang Yi has any aesthetic pursuit, if you don't think this word is too pretentious, this picture is my favorite. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 379. There were 2, "I really can't get out" in this sentence. The former referred to his ability, and the latter referred to reality. Ning Ke was thinking and worrying at this moment. The headmaster of the academy had sent him to the back cliff for closed-door training, which made him depressed and even a little desperate. However, he had always thought that the academy would let him out if he was really at his wits' end. He could not just watch his hair turn white overnight and die in this cave of old age. However, in less than a day, he was meditating in the Cloud Cliff Cave. He increasingly felt that his judgment was not trustworthy. Perhaps this cliff cave was really an endless abyss. Listening to his question, the two beside the bonfire fell into silence. After a long time, second brother shook his head and eldest brother let out a slight sigh. The mountain wind whistled, and the flamboyant firewood on the cliff plateau gradually weakened. Ning-Kay held the hot tea and looked at the flame. He suddenly felt a little cold and regretted following the headmaster of the academy to the back cliff instead of running away with Sang-Sang. The cold and the fear of being imprisoned for life finally made the anger that he had accumulated for half a day burst out. He shouted, "It's the first day I see my student, and he locks him up in the cave and prepares to lock him up for life. What kind of logic is this? I didn't do anything wrong, nor did I violate the Academy's rules. Why did he do this? Who does he think he is? The Emperor or the Prefectural Magistrate of Chang'an City? Didn't they say that the law of the Tang Empire is the most important? He set up a private prison to imprison innocent people. Does that count as violating the law of the Tang Empire? I'm going to sue him. I'm going to go out and sue him." The two senior brothers beside the bonfire knew that he was just venting, so they ignored him. Ning-Kay gradually calmed down and laughed at himself. He thought that the headmaster of the academy was not the emperor, but he was more honorable than the emperor. His words were more effective than the law of the Tang Empire. The bonfire shone around the entrance of the cliff cave. Eldest brother looked at the blood stains on the front of Meng-Chi's robe and knew that Meng-Chi had tried to escape as soon as he entered the cliff cave, just as everyone had expected. He advised, "It's not easy to do isolated meditation in the cliff cave. It took youngest uncle 3 years to figure it out. You need to be patient." During the day in the hut on the other side of the mountain, Ning-Kay already knew that youngest uncle had been imprisoned in the cliff cave. But now he knew that even youngest uncle, who was once the most powerful person in the world, had to spend a whole 3 years to escape. His body could not help but become colder. No matter how confident he was, he did not dare to hope that he could be compared to little uncle. Little uncle had used 3 years back then, so how long would it take for him to escape? 10 years or a lifetime? He lowered his head and said, "What if we can't get out? It's meaningless for anyone to imprison me in the cliff cave for a lifetime. It's the most meaningless thing to realize that it's meaningless when I'm old." Youngest uncle once said that fate itself is a very cruel guy. Before making sure that you can take on the mission, it will do everything it can to break every bone in you, strip every bit of your flesh and blood, and let you suffer the most extreme pain in the world. Only in this way can your willpower and mind be strong enough to be chosen by fate. Second brother looked at him and said, "Only a real desperate situation can inspire true courage. So this cliff cave must be a place of death for you. Only in this way can you understand that thing and really deceive heaven and earth. When youngest brother and Long Qing climbed the mountain, I saw your mind and will. I know that you have potential and it's possible. So even if this thing is meaningless to the world, it is meaningful to you." Ning-Kay raised his head and looked at his senior brother by the bonfire. He thought of the words, "deceive heaven and earth," and then thought of how youngest uncle was also imprisoned in the cliff cave for 3 years. Finally, he confirmed his guess. The reason why the headmaster of academy asked him to seclude himself was indeed related to joining the devil. But why did youngest uncle practice Howren's sword and join the devil? Why did the headmaster of academy lock him in the cave? Ning-Kay suddenly wanted to know what happened at that time because he seemed to be on the same path as youngest uncle. So he needed to learn and think about it. Eldest brother looked at Sang-Sang, who was sleeping by the bonfire. After a moment of hesitation, he smiled and said slowly, "I talk too slowly. Let Jun-Mo tell you." Second brother said, "We have all been to the precipice, but we have never entered this cliff cave. In all the years of the academy, only youngest uncle was imprisoned here for 3 years. He looked at Ning Ke in the cave and said, "Youngest brother, you have seen the first exploration of Howren's sword in the old library. Later, I taught you the Great Spirit by the Mirror Lake. Now you have inherited youngest uncle's breath in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine and learned the Great Spirit. Naturally, you understand that Howren's sword and Great Spirit are 2 different things." At this point, it was meaningless for Ning Ke to hide the fact that he joined the devil, especially in front of his 2 senior brothers. After a moment of silence, he said, "The Great Spirit absorbs the aura of heaven and earth into the body. According to the doctrine of Hautian Taoism, learning the Great Spirit is equal to joining the devil." Obviously, the 2 people by the bonfire had known about this for a long time. They did not show any surprise on their faces. Second brother recalled the past and praised, "Howren's sword is a swordsmanship created by the predecessors of the academy. When it is cultivated to the highest level, the flying sword can pierce through the clouds in the 9th heaven. It is not weaker than Liu Bai's day swordsmanship." Youngest uncle was so talented that he easily cultivated the Howren sword to such an extreme state. However, he was not complacent at all. He also comprehended the Great Spirit with the Howren sword style. Youngest uncle was only 16 years old at that time. Ning Ke had long been used to the geniuses in the back of the mountain of the academy. Moreover, youngest uncle was second brother's idol. He had also felt the supreme power of the sword style left by youngest uncle in the wilderness. Therefore, he was not too shocked when he heard that youngest uncle was in the same state as Liu Bai, the strongest man in the world, at the age of 16. However, he still could not help but feel a little dizzy when he thought that the Great Spirit was created by youngest uncle. Now you and I both know that youngest uncle's Great Spirit is essentially in conflict with the philosophy of Hautian Taoism. In other words, it is the cultivation method of the Devil's Doctrine. Therefore, when the headmaster found out about this, he directly locked youngest uncle in this cliff cave. It is said that the headmaster also said the same words to youngest uncle at that time. Ning Ke asked, "Which words?" "You can come out when you've figured it out." Ning Ke was speechless. Second brother continued, "It took youngest uncle a whole 3 years to understand some things. He walked out of the cliff cave, rode a little black donkey out of the academy and entered Chang'an City. From then on, he entered the human realm. After that, he killed all the powerhouses in the world with a cyan steel sword in his hand. He even went to the wilderness to destroy the Devil's Doctrine. In these countless battles, youngest uncle's Howren sword was unparalleled, but Hautian Taoism and the Buddhism sect did not suspect anything." He looked at Ning Ke and said, "Because youngest uncle understood some things in the cliff cave. Ning Ke also understood some things." After a moment of silence, second brother continued, "After youngest uncle destroyed the Devil's Doctrine with his sword, he was disheartened by something and rode back to the academy on the little black donkey. He pondered for a night in the sword forest at the front of the mountain, and then went to the back of the mountain to talk with the headmaster for 3 days. Then he came to the cliff and built this hut, which is the one in front of you. After youngest uncle destroyed the Devil's Doctrine, he was recognized as the strongest person in the world. Many unworldly sublime beings wanted to challenge him. At that time, there were only the headmaster, youngest uncle, me and the scholar in the back of the mountain of the academy. Without the big tactical array in the cloud abyss, anyone could challenge him. It was more troublesome than what you encountered in Chang'an City a few days ago. Eldest brother thought of the sword Qi and Buddha's light between the precipices at the back of the cliff and smiled slightly. Youngest uncle did not feel bored. He meditated and pondered in the hut by the cliff. When he was depressed, a real powerhouse would come to him to test his sword, so he killed him with a sword. Now that I think about it, Jishou Abbey and Xiankong Temple have been silent these years. I'm afraid that too many people died in youngest uncle's hands. Second brother looked back at the precipice not far away and thought of the battles that had taken place here in the past. He thought of the experts at the peak of the 5 realms from the unknown place who had fallen under youngest uncle's sword one after another. They suffered heavy casualties and fell off the cliff, and no one remembered their names. He felt proud and regretful. Back then, those people who came to these cliffs and precipices knew that the youngest uncle was invincible, but they still came one after another. They were all cultivators who were truly worthy of respect. That kind of pride that cultivators should have was innately not something that the mediocre and fearful of death in the cultivation world today could compare to. Second brother was also very proud. He had always wanted to follow in youngest uncle's footsteps. He also wanted to recreate the scene where people on the cliff burned their lives into fireworks for dignity and pride. It was a pity that those people were all dead. How many people in the world were worthy of respect and were worthy of fighting? Those unworldly sublime beings either died or escaped with injuries. No one dared to challenge the academy again. The cliff returned to peace. Then one day, youngest uncle suddenly left the hut and never came back. Second brother finished telling the story of that year. Ning Ke was silent for a long time. He heard from Yi Hong Yu in the wilderness that youngest uncle was finally killed by heaven's punishment. It was probably because of this that the headmaster of the academy went to West Hill to cut down a mountain of peach blossoms. Haotian Taoism did not want to mention this again. The reputation of the world's most powerful person gradually disappeared. Why did youngest uncle receive heaven's punishment? Because the Great Spirit did not tolerate Haotian, and he was already the world's most powerful person, so he provoked Haotian's anger? Youngest uncle had pondered for many years in the thatched cottage in the cliff cave and finally embarked on the path of destruction. How could he understand this matter? The headmaster imprisoned you in the cliff cave, which is equivalent to treating you as youngest uncle in the past. There is a lot of hidden expectations. If you can't even get through this first obstacle, how can you go on in the future? Eldest brother looked at him and said with a smile, "Youngest brother, your state is much lower than that of youngest uncle in the past. Naturally, there will not be a problem immediately. However, it does not prevent you from going out with a black umbrella in advance. Because your state is still low, it is easier to solve that problem than youngest uncle in the past. So don't always think that you are not as good as youngest uncle. You still have hope." Ning Ke looked at the night sky outside the cliff cave. Ever since he returned to Chang'an from the wilderness, he had been thinking about that problem. How could he prevent the essence of the Great Spirit from being discovered by others? In the battle with Monk Guanhai, he had already made some attempts. However, those methods were superficial and could not fundamentally solve the problem. If he wanted to solve the problem fundamentally, he had to learn to tell a big lie to deceive everyone in the world, even the world. This is the first chapter. I have written some parts of the second chapter. It should be finished before 8:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 380. Back then, youngest uncle had secluded himself in the cliff cave and the hut twice. For the first time, he perfectly solved the problem of traveling in the world with the Great Spirit in 3 years. However, when he became the most powerful person in the world and no longer needed to deceive the world, he had to face a more troublesome situation. So he secluded himself again and thought hard. After a long time, he finally found that he could not deceive himself, so he left the academy and went to the sky. Then he disappeared without a trace. Ning Ke looked at the night sky outside the cliff plateau and the stars on the dark curtain. For the first time, he tried to look behind the stars and touch the deep curtain. In the world, no one dared to disrespect the academy except for Haotian Taoism. The academy was so powerful that it was arrogant and arrogant. Youngest uncle was still a legend in the back of the mountain. Since the headmaster could take in Tang Xiaotang, a girl from the Devil's Doctrine, It meant that the academy did not discriminate against the devil's doctrine. So why did the headmaster imprison youngest uncle and him today? He looked at the night sky and murmured in his heart, "Is he trying to deceive your eyes? But you are the divine light, how can you have eyes?" Ninkei's mind was a bit confused. He suddenly felt a little scared and understood that he was too far away from the real origin of the world. He was not qualified to think about these things. Once he thought about it, the stars in the night sky seemed to laugh. He had to solve the problem in front of him. The problem of how to leave this cliff cave. Youngest uncle had solved this problem perfectly in the past. Now it was his turn. In Chang'an at night, those who were qualified or needed to know received the message from the academy. They knew two things. The first was that the headmaster had finally ended his 2-year journey and returned to the academy. The second was that Ninkei, Mr. 13 on the second floor of the academy, was ordered by the headmaster to cultivate in seclusion. Although Xingjing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, was a first-class official, he was not qualified to receive the message from the academy. However, he had recently found his long-lost daughter. Therefore, the Grand Secretary's mansion was the first place to know about these two things besides the Imperial City. Cultivate in seclusion? How long will it take? Xingjing frowned and asked. Eunuch Lin shook his head and said hesitantly, 1 or 2 months. Who can say for sure? The concept of those eccentric people on the second floor of the academy is probably different from ours. Xingjing asked confusedly. According to the laws of the Tang Empire and the rules of the palace, the Ministry of Rites has always been in charge of the affairs of the academy, especially the second floor of the academy. Except for the people in the palace and the military ministry, no one else knows about it. Why did His Majesty ask you to tell me about it? Eunuch Lin smiled bitterly and said, Isn't it all because of the young lady who just returned from your estate? I heard that the principal personally ordered her to take care of Mr. 13. Since Mr. 13 is going into secluded cultivation, your young lady will probably have to accompany him. Don't ask me when she'll be back. I really don't know. Hearing this, Mrs. Xing panicked. Before the 2 senior brothers left the cliff cave, they said something to Ningquebec. He knew that the headmaster and the academy wouldn't just leave him in the cave and let him fend for himself. Feeling a little relieved, he found a corner where the wind couldn't blow, spread his bedding and fell into a deep sleep. When he woke up and opened his eyes, he found that the sky was still dark. He walked to the entrance of the cave and looked out. There was no wind or rain. The distant Chang'an city was shrouded in the morning light, which was very beautiful. Only then did he realize that the cliff faced the west. He could see more of the sunset from the cave, but it was much more difficult to get close to the morning light than the people under the sea of clouds. There were many things on the pole that second brother carried, including many things from the old brush pen shop. No one knew if it was Chun Pipi or another senior brother or sister who went to Chang'an City to fetch them. Before going to bed, Sang Sang checked everything. The big black umbrella, the primordial 13 arrows, the box of banknotes, and even the toothbrush and towel were all there. Sang Sang passed water, toothbrush, and towel into the cave. Ning Ke washed up hastily and ate breakfast. He immediately felt refreshed. Suddenly, he thought of a problem and couldn't help but frown. There's a toilet. Sang Sang knew what he was worried about from his expression. Ning Ke said helplessly, It will stink. Sang Sang said, Just wash it frequently. Ning Ke looked at the sea of clouds between the cliffs and shook his head. He sighed and said, It's a pity that these clouds will be ruined. But youngest uncle also dirted it in the past, so it's not a big deal even if there are 2 more of us. After the refreshing feeling, Ning Ke pinched his nose and was ready to carry the toilet. Sang Sang looked at him and couldn't help laughing. She said, Didn't you do these things by yourself when you were young? It's only been a few years, and you're already disgusted with the smell. Ning Ke said seriously, Our identities are different now, so we naturally feel different. Speaking of which, there's something serious that I've always forgotten to discuss with you. Sang Sang asked, What is it? Ning Ke said, I'm thinking if I should buy a maid. Sang Sang pointed at herself and asked confusedly, Am I not a maid? Ning Ke said with a smile, Although you're still my little handmaiden, you're the daughter of a first-rank grand secretary. It's okay to make the bed and fold the quilt, but how can I let you continue to do the heavy work? I'm not used to being served by others, Sang Sang said, thinking that there will be one more person in the old brush pen shop. I feel a little awkward. Ning Ke thought for a while and said, It's indeed a little awkward. Sang Sang smiled and shook her head. She walked into the cave with a basin of water for him to wash his hands. Then she walked to the corner to carry the toilet, walked back to the cliff, and poured it into the flowing cloud. After washing his hands, Ning Ke pulled down a dry towel hanging on the cave wall and wiped his hands. He looked at her and reminded her, Put it far away. Although it's your own smell, it's still disgusting. Sang Sang agreed. Ning Ke suddenly froze while wiping his hands. He looked at her figure and felt a little dizzy. He suddenly came to his senses and shouted in shock, How did you come in? Sang Sang turned back in shock, and found that she had walked into the cliff cave. And she had come in once when she carried the toilet. She couldn't help but let out a soft cry and quickly ran out. After a while, she held the cave wall and carefully looked inside. She asked, Are you all right? Ning Ke was a little confused and said, I'm fine. The question is, are you all right? Sang Sang looked down at herself and patted her chest to make sure that she was not hurt and did not vomit blood like Ning Quebec. She said, I seem to be fine. Do you want to try again? Ning Ke walked to the entrance of the cliff cave and stood in the line drawn yesterday. He stretched out his hand and pressed it in the air. He was a little disappointed to find that his palm still felt the stagnant touch. I can't get out. He shook his head and understood what was going on. The inhibition at the entrance of the cliff cave was specially set by the headmaster to imprison youngest uncle. It was aimed at the great spirit in youngest uncle's body. The simple aura that the headmaster attached to the entrance of the cliff cave would suddenly activate once it sensed the existence of the great spirit. The stronger the great spirit was, the more powerful the inhibition would be. He and youngest uncle both had the great spirit in their bodies. If they wanted to get out of the cliff cave, they had to cultivate the great spirit to be strong enough to defeat the aura left by the headmaster and destroy the sea of chi of heaven and earth at the entrance of the cliff cave. Or they had to figure out how to integrate the great spirit in their bodies with the chi of heaven and earth in nature so that they could be in harmony. Only then could they not disturb the sea of chi at the entrance of the cliff cave. There was one last way, and that was to destroy the great spirit in their bodies. Ning Ke looked at the entrance of the cliff cave and felt a lot of emotions. The inhibition set by the headmaster was very simple. In essence, it was the aura that he left here. However, it set endless problems for the person who broke the inhibition. There were many difficult questions in the world. The difficulty lay in finding the only answer under countless complicated clues. The question left by the headmaster was very difficult, but it had a few answers. It was very difficult to choose. If one did not have the confidence to cultivate the great spirit to the extent of defeating the headmaster, would he be willing to destroy the powerful and precious great spirit in his body? Time would pass in the hesitation and struggle of the person who solved the question. As time went by day, it would become more and more difficult to make a choice. It would even become a terrible torture. If one finally decided to give up after being imprisoned in the cliff cave for many years, he would look back on the first night he entered the cave. He would definitely regret why he did not destroy the great spirit in his body at that time. He had persisted for so many years. Wasn't it the most stupid thing to do? Would he be willing to give up in the face of such pain? It was obvious that youngest uncle did not choose the last method. Because when he left the academy and entered the human realm, he still had the great spirit. Moreover, A peerless figure like youngest uncle would definitely understand the true intention of the headmaster's question earlier than Ning Quebec. With his temperament and willpower, if he wanted to give up, he would definitely do so without any hesitation or wasting 3 years. Ning Ke did not think of the possibility that youngest uncle could directly break the inhibition set by the headmaster with the Great Spirit. There was no reason to support his judgment. He just felt that this scene was not beautiful. Youngest uncle should have chosen the second method. 3 months. Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang, who still did not dare to walk back into the cliff cave, and repeated, 3 months. I'm not as strong as youngest uncle. I need 3 months to think about whether to use the last method or not. If I can't bear to destroy my Great Spirit, you know what to do. Sang Sang asked nervously, You want to use that method? I have never used it. Ning Ke said, I need your help. After a moment of silence, Sang Sang said, Are you sure? Ning Ke said, I am sure. A cyan dress appeared between the cliffs. It was blown by the mountain wind, and a petite figure could be vaguely seen. Today, the first person to visit Ning Ke was third sister, Yulien. Yulien walked to the cliff platform and sat down in front of the line at the entrance of the cave. She took out an old book from her sleeve and handed it to Ning Quebec. She looked at him and said softly, If you want to solve the problem, there is only one way. The cover of the old book was written with the words, Origin of the Aura of Heaven and Earth. Ning Ke took a look at the old book in his hand and asked seriously, Which method? Yulien tucked her hair behind her ears and said, To learn. This is the second chapter. The third chapter will be very late. Try to finish it before 11 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 381. Yulien was the first person Ning Ke knew from the back mountain of the academy. However, she was a female professor at that time, while he was just an ordinary student who went to the old library every day. In those memorable days, Ning Ke and she sat by the east and west windows respectively. One of them was writing regular script, while the other held a book and meditated. They seldom talked and occasionally nodded to each other. Later in the Sword Forest, they talked a few words. Later, before Ning Ke left the academy for the wilderness, she gave him something. Apart from that, there was no more communication. After all, they had a period of time in the old library, from the time when flowers bloomed to the time when cicadas sang. So they should be able to get along peacefully. However, Ning Ke really did not know how to face this third sister. Among the disciples of the back mountain of the academy, Yulien was a very special one. She was ranked only after eldest brother and second brother. However, her state of cultivation was ordinary. She was gentle and quiet, but did not like to communicate with others. It seemed that she was not interested in anything in the world and rarely appeared in front of people. When people saw her, it seemed that she was always writing hairpin-style small regular script. She was writing regular script in the old library, when there was a gathering, and when the headmaster of the academy opened the gate of the back mountain of the academy to imprison Ning Ke, she was still writing regular script in the drafty thatched cottage. When Ning Ke and Prince Long Qing climbed the mountain, everyone gathered at the peak and talked about it. At that moment, she stood alone in the flowers by the cliff, smiling and saying nothing. For Ning Ke, the biggest difficulty in getting along with third sister was that he did not know what attitude he should use to get along with her. He could not tell how old she was. She was quiet, elegant, and even a little cold. She wore a loose academy uniform and had a calm expression on her face, which gave her a very calm temperament. Her delicate and somewhat childish face and small body made people mistake her for a young girl when they saw her. Senior sister, what book is this? This is a forbidden book. Hearing Yulien's gentle voice, Ning Ke raised his head in surprise. This book on the origin of the aura of heaven and earth was written by a grand cultivator hundreds of years ago. It once caused a great stir in the cultivation world. Because it went against the teachings of Haotian, it was listed as a forbidden book by the West Hill Divine Palace and was forbidden to appear in the world. The last time this book appeared was in a large family in the Kingdom of Song. That family was exterminated because they secretly kept this book. Ning Kei's hand, which was holding the old book, slightly stiffened. He did not expect this book to have such an amazing origin. He could not understand it and asked, "Then why does the Academy have this book?" Yulian smiled and said, "Of course, the Academy can't lack books." Ning Kei thought of the huge cave next to the scholar's hut and shrugged his shoulders. "Senior sister, what if I can't understand this book?" Yulian said, "According to the headmaster's order, I'll come to the cliff cave every 10 days. Study this book well during these 10 days. Write down any questions you have and ask me later." Only then did Ning Kei realize that it was the headmaster's arrangement. Yulian did not say anything else. She only told him to study hard and went down the mountain. For the rest of the day, Ning Kei had been reading and studying except for eating. The more he read, the more he understood why the West Hill Divine Palace had listed this book as a banned book. Because the beginning of the book, Origin of Aura of Heaven and Earth, clearly stated the details and the final argument. Since the beginning of the world, all things were born, and the sun was born in the sky, giving all things a shape, state, and essence. All things died and were renewed, and the essence in the body was scattered between heaven and earth. It was the aura of heaven and earth that cultivators could perceive today, which was the so-called chi of heaven and earth. Ning Kei did not study the origin of this world, but he felt that this argument was quite novel and interesting. Perhaps it was because this argument was too novel that it was strictly banned by the West Hill Divine Palace. Because this argument believed that the aura of heaven and earth came from all things themselves, and was not given by Haotian as mentioned in the doctrine of Haotian. If people really believed this argument, how could Haotian Taoism maintain the cultivator's reverence for Haotian? After entering the academy, Ning Kei had read many classics on cultivation in the old library. The first one he read was about the chi of heaven and earth. However, the origin of chi of heaven and earth in his hand was much more profound and obscure. Therefore, even though he was very interested, he still read very slowly. From sunrise to sunset, he had been sitting at the entrance of the cave, reading this forbidden book in silence. His mind was immersed in the wisdom of the predecessors, and he had a new understanding of the composition of this world, especially the production, quantity and operation of the aura of heaven and earth. He did not know how this book could help him solve the problem left by the headmaster of the academy, and how to complete his seclusion. But since the headmaster of the academy had asked him to read this book, he would continue reading it. Because he believed that the headmaster of the academy did not trap him in the cliff cave just to make him a professor of the academy. Ning Kei was reading in the cliff cave, and Sang Sang was watching him reading outside the cliff cave. After a long time, he was still interested. Every time he understood a profound explanation, his face would show a happy expression. Sang Sang, on the other hand, was bored. Fortunately, she had been used to boredom over the years, so she washed her hair. The night gradually shrouded Chang'an City, the wilderness, the drifting clouds, and the cliff. After Sang Sang finished cooking, Ning Kei ate a few mouthfuls and began to read again. Sang Sang saw the flickering light of the torch. She thought for a while and walked into the hut. After searching for a long time, she found an oil lamp and passed it into the cave. Under the dim light of the oil lamp, Ning Kei held the book and continued to read it attentively. The experience of his previous life made him somewhat resistant to learning knowledge. However, it was also the experience of his previous life that told him that if he wanted to learn the knowledge in the book as soon as possible and be able to use it, he had to maintain absolute concentration. Ning Kei read until late at night, when the oil in the lamp was about to run out. He did not rush to sleep, but closed his eyes to review today's reading in his mind. Because he slept too late, Ning Ke was still very tired when he was awakened by the sound of bellows outside the cliff cave the next morning. He could not help but feel annoyed and wondered where the sound came from. He rubbed his eyes, put on a thin coat, and walked to the entrance of the cliff cave. He looked at the fat man who was supporting his waist and looking at the scenery outside the cliff, panting and pretending to be pretentious. His expression suddenly changed. The sound that woke him up was Chen Pippi's panting when he climbed the stone path. However, he did not expect that a person's panting could be as loud as thunder. "Do you have to be so tired?" he said helplessly. Hearing his voice, Chen Pippi did not turn around. He held his round waist and looked at the precipice in front of him, the drifting clouds between the cliffs, and Chang'an City in the distance under the morning light. He panted and said in a hoarse voice like a scholar, "Oh, I once climbed to the top to see." "Stop!" Ning Ke stopped his sigh by driving a donkey. Chen Pippi turned to look at him and shook his head repeatedly. He criticized, "That's not elegant. Although youngest uncle did ride a donkey back then, why do such an indecent thing in such a wonderful view?" Ning Ke looked at him and said angrily, "You know I'm not in a good mood. Don't pollute my ears with those sour words. Be careful, or I'll kick you down the mountain." Chen Pippi thought of the precipice that was so close to him when he went up the mountain, and his legs became weak again. He patted his chest with lingering fear and said, "This precipice is too steep. I almost lost my life when I climbed up. Thinking that you are going to stay here for 8 to 10 years, I really can't feel good." Ning Ke sneered and said, "That's because you're too fat." This sentence hit the nail on the head. Chen Pippi did not know how to fight back. He looked at the cliff cave and suddenly his eyes brightened. He exclaimed, "So this is where youngest uncle used to live. I didn't visit it because of the steep mountain road. Today is the first time I see it. This cliff cave is not ordinary. It's very historic. It's a great honor to live in it. I envy you." A stone whizzed through the air from the cave and almost hit Chen Pippi's foot. It bounced a few times on the cliff platform and fell into the sea of clouds on the cliff, never to be found again. Chen Pippi was shocked. He pointed at the cliff cave and shouted, "You're going to kill me!" Ning Ke continued to search in the cave for a long time, but he couldn't find a second stone. He angrily rushed to the entrance of the cave and shouted, "You shameless thing! Why don't you live in such a historic cave? I'll give all the honor to you. Come in. Come in." Chen Pippi sneered and said, "Come out if you can." Ning Ke said shamelessly, "Come in if you can." Sang Sang had been standing beside the cliff cave and watching the senior brother and junior brother quarreling. She finally couldn't help saying, "I think you're both very capable." Ning Ke and Chen Pippi looked at her at the same time. Chen Pippi hesitated for a moment and asked seriously, "Are you telling the truth or sarcasm?" Sang Sang looked at him and said nothing. Chen Pippi had always thought that he was a peerless genius. However, he had been to the old brush pen shop several times and played chess with Sang Sang. At least in front of Sang Sang, he didn't have such confidence anymore. Correspondingly, he valued Sang Sang's evaluation or praise of him very much. Sang Sang's silence hurt his self-esteem to a certain extent. He looked at Ning Ke in the cliff cave and said mockingly, "Only a monkey locked in an iron cage would throw stones at people because it's too boring. I forgive you." Ning Ke said, "Whatever you say. Hit me if you can." Chen Pippi took something out of his arms and threw it directly into the cave. It happened so suddenly that Ning Ke was almost hit in the face. Fortunately, his body reacted quickly. He turned sideways and reached out his right hand to catch the thing. It was a wrinkled book. There was no name on the cover, but there were many sweat stains. Ning Ke thought that the sweat stains might be from the fat man and felt a little disgusted. "What book is this?" He resisted the nausea and looked at Chen Pippi outside the cave. Chen Pippi said, "No name." "Then what does this book talk about?" "The no-boundary spirit of the academy." Ning Ke didn't understand and asked, "What's that?" Churn Pippi thought that he was teasing him again and said angrily, "This book talks about the no-boundary spirit of the academy. If you don't understand it, I'll tell the teacher. I'm tired, but there's still the 4th chapter. But it might not be finished until 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. Let's read it tomorrow." Good. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 382. The No-Boundary Spirit of the Academy? Ning Ke looked at the wrinkled book in his hand and naturally thought of the opening day of the 2nd floor of the Academy last spring. He turned around and saw the words, "A gentleman is not a tool," on the stone when he climbed down the mountain with difficulty. He could not help frowning and thinking for a long time. A few days ago, he learned from second brother that Prince Longqing saw the words, "A gentleman is not a tool," which was actually a comment made by the headmaster of the academy. So the words, "A gentleman is not a tool," were undoubtedly left by the headmaster of the academy for him, or a warning to his life. What did the words, "A gentleman is not a tool," on the stone mean? What is the connection between this old book and the word, "not a tool"? Did the headmaster of the academy foresee that he needed to learn the no-boundary spirit of the academy in advance? Ning Ke looked out of the cave and asked, "If there is a problem in the book, how can I solve it?" Churn Pippi said, "I will go up the mountain every 10 days. If there is anything you don't understand." Ning Ke just realized that this was the curriculum arrangement of the headmaster of the academy for him, just like third sister Yulian. He shook his head and said, "You are not third sister, so don't be too optimistic. You have to come up the mountain every day, or sang and I will be bored to death." Churn Pippi said sarcastically, "You want me to come up the mountain with you? Are you begging me? You were so fierce to me before. What can you do to me if I go down the mountain now?" Ning Ke replied, "Then get out of the mountain quickly." Churn Pippi was really obedient. He turned around and was ready to go down the cliff platform. Suddenly, he stopped and turned to look at Ning Ke in the cave. He was silent for a long time. Ning Ke looked at him with a slightly strange expression. Churn Pippi suddenly said, "I heard that the headmaster prepared 3 books for you to read. If you can't come out after reading all 3 books, then you may not come out in this life." Ning Ke slightly frowned and asked, "What's the 3rd book?" Churn Pippi shook his head and said, "No one knows." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke suddenly laughed and said, "If one day it is confirmed that I can't get out, I will have to trouble you to find me a spoon." Churn Pippi was slightly surprised and asked, "What do you need a spoon for?" Ning Ke pointed to the depths of the dark cliff cave behind him and said, "Give me a spoon, and I can dig a long tunnel directly through the academy's cliff, mirror lake and mist, and return to the human world." Churn Pippi felt that there was something wrong with his brain and said sympathetically, "Don't put too much pressure on yourself." Ning Ke knew that he didn't understand what kind of spirit and attitude he was trying to express, but it was enough for him to understand. He lowered his head and began to read the book. Churn Pippi heaved a sigh and left the cliff plateau slowly and smoothly. The metaphysical was known as the Tao, and the metaphysical was known as the tool. Artifact. The great Tao was not a weapon, it was the Tao of heaven, it did not care about its specific form. A gentleman is not a tool, which means that people should not rigidly adhere to some fixed rules. The 2 words "not a tool" meant that they held a condescending, arrogant, and undisciplined attitude towards the rules. Note: there are some differences in the original meaning of the word. I chose this one because of the need of the story. Ning Ke opened the old book with no words on the cover, and was soon attracted by the contents of the book, and his eyes could no longer leave the paper. For the rest of the day and night, apart from eating and sleeping, he read and thought. When he got tired of reading one book, or when his mind got stuck in some kind of stagnation, he would switch to another book, and when he could no longer progress in reading this book, he would switch back to the original one. Time passed slowly in this cycle and adjustment. Sang cooked and cleaned, chatted with him when he was tired, and when she had the courage to walk into the cliff cave again, she quietly sat beside him, holding a needle and thread to embroider the soles of shoes. No matter how the two books helped Ning Ke solve his problems and get rid of his life as a prisoner, the knowledge and wisdom of the predecessors in the book were enough to make him feel that he had gained a lot. The book on the origin of the aura of heaven and earth made him come across this new world idea for the first time, and then in the following sections, he understood more new sayings. The so-called aura of heaven and earth was a kind of invisible particle that naturally existed in the wilderness and rivers, which was also called the chi of heaven and earth by cultivators. According to the book, all the chi of heaven and earth in the world originated from the sun in the sky, and only a small part came from the depths of the earth. These original auras began to show different characteristics as they soaked and washed over time, because of the different things attached to them, and because of the infection of the environment. For example, the chi of heaven and earth contained in the trees was completely different from the chi of heaven and earth in the stones. However, this difference was extremely subtle in the perception of ordinary cultivators, and it was difficult to be discovered. Ning Ke thought of the feeling when he first saw the stone array tactics of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine by the Daming Lake, and found that the saying in the book was somewhat different from what his master Yen Sei had said, but it did make some sense. After thinking for a moment, he took out several pieces of fu paper and cast them one by one. Looking at the fire and water mist in front of him, he used his psyche power to carefully perceive the difference between them, and then carefully recorded what he learned on the paper. In the afternoon, after eating, he put the bowl beside him casually, and began to cast fu again to experience the subtle difference between the chi of heaven and earth. When he was free in the old brush pen shop, he would write fu for leisure. Although the power of fu was still weak, he had saved a lot of fu paper, which was more than enough for experiment. This time he cast a water fu. The yellowish fu paper disappeared in the air, and the chi of heaven and earth in the cliff cave slowly converged and condensed into a handful of water, and then fell to the ground, falling right into the bowl. The water rippled in the bowl for a few times, and then became calm. Ning Ke looked at the gradually muddy water in the bowl, and thoughtfully opened the book that described the no-boundary spirit of the academy beside him, and began to compare it with some contents in the book. Then, he cast a water talisman and let the water fall on the ground. He stared at the water that gradually disappeared along the cracks of the stone, like countless transparent earthworms. The bowl was an utensil, the cracks of the stones were utensils, and even the vault of heaven and field was just a large utensil. When the water fell into the bowl, it was a semicircle. When it fell into the cracks of the stones, it was a transparent earthworm. When it was released by the clouds, it was a bead curtain. When it flowed into the field, it was countless tiny particles. The water itself had no shape, and it only had shape because of the utensil that carried it. This was the real no-boundary spirit. Was the chi of heaven and earth like this kind of existence? It was easy to draw such an inference. Looking at the book, Ning Ke did not feel proud at all, and tried to find the connection between this inference and the inhibition of the cliff cave. After a long time, he woke up from his meditation and rubbed his eyebrows tiredly. Then he noticed that Sang Sang had come to him, and was embroidering there. "I remember before I went to the wilderness, you said that your embroidery was so bad that you didn't want people in Chang'an to see it, so you gave your needles and thread to Xiao Xiao. Where did this come from?" Ning Ke asked. Sang Sang raised her head and scratched her temple with the end of the needle. She said, "I asked Seventh Sister for this yesterday when I went down the mountain. I have to find something to do to kill time." Ning Ke thought that she was really bored staying on the cliff plateau. Then he suddenly thought of something, and handed over the book of No Boundary Spirit in his hand. He said, "You can read it when you are bored." Sang Sang was slightly startled and said, "Can I read it too?" These two books were the Academy's treasured supreme arts. They must have been carefully selected by the headmaster for his little disciple, and the common people could not read them. Logically speaking, Ning Ke should not let Sang Sang read them, but he had long been used to sharing all the good things with Sang Sang, and even ranked her ahead of himself. The most important thing was that he had been poor and afraid since childhood, so he was stingy. Now he no longer worried about money, but he still subconsciously wanted to take advantage of others. Ning Ke said, "This is a good thing. You will suffer a loss if you don't read it." Sang Sang felt it was indeed a pity and said, "But I can't understand it." Ning Ke said, "Even the great divine priest of light, that shameless swindler, wants to accept you as his successor. You must be very talented in cultivation, maybe even better than me and Chen Pippi. You have been following me all these years, but I have not thought of exploring this side of you. Maybe a cultivation genius has been buried." Sang Sang laughed and said, "You are making fun of me again." Ning Ke said, "Never mind that. We will take advantage of you if you read it." Sang Sang thought it made sense. She took the book and began to read it carefully. Ning Ke continued to read the book. The more he read, the more he felt that it was reasonable for the West Hill Divine Palace to seal this book. Because this book actually included the chi of heaven and earth absorbed by the Devil's Doctrine's cultivation method into the body, and it was the same as Haotian's divine light. Suddenly, his eyes suddenly brightened. Because he saw a whole set of cultivation methods for cultivating chi at the back of the book. At the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, Ning Ke had inherited the youngest uncle's mantle. He had used the residual sword style in the mottled sword mark left by youngest uncle to directly create a path in Ning Ke's snow mountain and ocean of chi. Then the Great Spirit poured into his body and drove the cyclone in his lower abdomen to start absorbing the chi of heaven and earth around. For Ning Ke now, once he used his psyche power to drive the cyclone to start absorbing the chi of heaven and earth, he could no longer control the process. He did not know how to make the process more efficient. If the cultivation method left in this book was real, wouldn't it mean that he could cultivate the Great Spirit much faster? Could he improve his state in the shortest time possible? Ning Ke's hands holding the book trembled slightly. The depression of being imprisoned in the cliff cave was replaced by the surprise and gratitude to the headmaster of the academy and third sister. The academy's cultivation classics should be shared, and such a great harvest and happiness should be shared. He turned around immediately and wanted to tell Sang Sang about it. However, he saw that Sang Sang had already fallen asleep. Looking at Sang Sang, who was holding the book and sleeping soundly without leaning against the wall of the cliff cave, Ning Ke could not help but laugh. He thought that this little girl was indeed not made for cultivation, or at least not for reading. After a while, Ning Ke calmed down and quietly read the cultivation method in the book from beginning to end. He only closed his eyes slowly when he was sure that he could remember every word in the book. He began to cultivate chi for the first time. What he cultivated was the Great Spirit. The 4th chapter is finally written. I'm also useless. These chapters are too damn hard to write. There will definitely be an update after I wake up. But today's update will be very late. I'm going to sleep. I'll ask for a recommendation vote to stimulate me. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 383. To raise was to support, to nurture, to pity, to protect, and to mend. To raise chi was to carry out these actions on the chi of heaven and earth that was absorbed into the body. Ning Ke followed the description in the book and entered a state that was similar to meditation. However, it was not as deep as meditation, and he still maintained a continuous connection with the real world. This connection was breathing, or in other words, breathing. The air in the cliff cave entered his lungs according to the rhythm of breathing, and then returned to the outside through his mouth and nose. The chi of heaven and earth contained in the air gradually settled and stopped in the process, and began to nourish every part of his body, including the most subtle parts. Every time he breathed, Ning Ke could feel a trace of qi of heaven and earth entering his body. This change was very subtle, but when he entered a certain rhythm, the superposition of this subtle change would become more obvious, even to the extent that he could feel the increase of the aura. After inheriting the youngest uncle's mantle at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, the process of absorbing the qi of heaven and earth and transforming it into the Great Spirit had always been slow. Moreover, at this time, he finally found that he could actively cultivate the Great Spirit, and from then on, it became something that he could control and look forward to. After the initial shock, he began to feel happy. This was a surprise. The night was deep and the morning light was about to rise. In the cliff cave, Sang Sang was dozing off while Ning Ke sat cross-legged and seriously breathed every breath of air. He felt the qi of heaven and earth flowing into his body, like a drunkard drinking cans of hard liquor. He was so happy and intoxicated that he did not know where he was and where he would go. The airflow in the cliff cave brought in the slightly cold mountain wind under the warm morning light. It blew on Sang Sang's body and woke her up from her sleep. She rubbed her eyes. She looked at Ning Ke beside her with a confused look on her face. With the influx of the qi of heaven and earth, the Great Spirit in Ning Ke's body was increasing at a slow but unstoppable speed. His body was also changing because of this. This change was deeply hidden under his skin, between his muscles, and in his blood. Except for himself, no one could see any trace of it with the naked eye. But Sang Sang still felt that Ning Ke was undergoing some kind of change. Because she could feel that in the space around her, there seemed to be a very faint existence, even fainter than the wind, slowly approaching Ning Ke's body. The morning mist between the cliffs also seemed to feel some kind of call and floated into the cave, gently covering Ning Ke's body. After a long time, Ning Ke woke up. He silently looked at the azure sky outside the cliff cave, deep in thought. The qi of heaven and earth was everywhere between the cliffs and the clouds. There was also the qi of heaven and earth in the quiet trees and the swimming fish. Therefore, when it entered the human body, it was still the qi of heaven and earth. Thinking in this way, what was the essential difference between the Haotian divine flame of Haotian Taoism and the genuine qi in the body of the powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine? The book on the origin of the aura of heaven and earth talked about this truth and tried to solve the doubts of cultivators in theory, trying to establish a unified system. This new system would fundamentally overthrow the doctrine of Haotian Taoism. No wonder it was banned by the West Hill Divine Palace. The other book told Ning Ke that he did not need to care about the form of the qi of heaven and earth. Just like water in nature, whether it was between cliffs, in the clouds, in the mountain stream, in the calm lake, or in the rushing river, the essence would not change. It was still water. The ideas of the two books were similar to a certain extent. However, the book on the origin of the aura of heaven and earth finally gave up the discussion of metaphysics and went directly to the road of cultivating a certain characteristic of the qi of heaven and earth to the extreme. Because the extreme would eventually return to the origin of things. The headmaster of the academy imprisoned Ning Ke in the cliff cave, which was equivalent to asking a difficult question and putting 3 answers in front of him in advance. The ideas in the two books were the two methods that the headmaster of the academy taught him. Either to cultivate the Great Spirit to the extreme and powerful state and ignore the heaven and earth, or to use the no-boundary spirit to harmonize the Great Spirit inside the body with the qi of heaven and earth outside the body. Chen Pippi said there were 3 books, and these were 2 of them. Then what was the 3rd book? What other methods could he find by reading that book? In the following days, Ning Ke seemed to return to the time when he first entered the academy and went to the old library. His life was calm and simple. He ate, slept, read, thought, and then read again. He had no distractions and was fully focused on reading. He put all the boring time and life in the cliff cave into reading. With the help of the 2 books, Ning Ke had a deeper understanding of the Great Spirit. The great spirit in his body became purer and more vigorous. At the same time, he had a better understanding of the operating rules and the existence of the chi of heaven and earth. He even made significant progress in talisman Taoism. He vaguely sensed the key to solve the problem of the headmaster of academy and to break the inhibition to leave the cliff cave. But he still could not grasp the thread. He could not figure out how to mix the two completely different auras with light and dust, or even turn their actual existence into nothingness. 10 days passed quickly. Third sister Yulian came. Her loose academy uniform fluttered in the cliff wall like a flag. She walked into the cliff cave and instantly became as quiet as the silk cloth on the table. Ning Ke did not waste any time. After a simple salute, he took out the paper with the questions he had these days and seriously asked her about the problems he had encountered in reading. Yulian began to answer after thinking for a while. Her words were concise and even too simple. It seemed that she was a man of few words. However, these simple answers often fell on the most critical parts and directly made Ning Ke's stagnant thoughts suddenly clear, and he easily saw a new path in the fog. Finally, Ning Ke began to ask about the qi cultivation method at the back of the book after hesitating for a while. Yulian frowned slightly and remained silent. Ning Ke glanced at Sangsang, who was sitting outside the cliff cave and embroidering. He thought that senior sister was silent because there were outsiders from the academy present and it was inconvenient. Yulian smiled and said, "Since the headmaster asked this little girl to accompany you, you don't mind her listening beside you. The so-called qi cultivation method seems to be from the devil's doctrine, but this cliff cave is far away from the world. Why do you care?" The next day, Chen Pippi climbed up the cliff platform panting. Ning Ke naturally laughed at him and expressed his great displeasure that Chen Pippi did not come up to the cliff to visit him these days. Chen Pippi explained that the stone path was too slanted and the cliff was too steep, but Ning Ke did not understand. He sighed helplessly and ignored this guy's annoyance. Then he began to practice the no-boundary spirit of the academy. The so-called no-boundary spirit means that there is no trace of it. Just like the snow mud, it is in the east and suddenly in the west. There is no way to know where the snow trembles. When you want to move, you move at will. If you don't, how can the enemy know what you want to do? Chen Pippi raised his right arm and pointed at the blue sky above the cliff with his ring finger. An invisible aura suddenly shot out from between his fingers, but it did not shoot into the sky in the direction of his fingers. Instead, it shot into the cliff cave unpredictably. That invisible aura was the qi of heaven and earth that was compressed to the extreme. The aura brushed past Ning Ke's shoulder and quietly fell on the hard rock wall of the cliff cave. With a soft sound, a dark round hole appeared on the wall. No one knew how deep the hole was. I was already very tired. Friends came from afar and I drank a few cups of wine. I suddenly collapsed and suffered for a long time, but I could only write this much. You all know that I have been working hard these days and I have a good attitude. I will continue to work hard tomorrow. Although I wrote less today, I really need the recommendation vote. After all, it's Monday. Please support me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 384. Ning Ke did not react at all. It was not until the invisible qi of the finger brushed past his shoulder and shot a deep black hole on the cave wall that he came to his senses and felt a chill in his heart. He did not know that Chen Pippi's finger was the natural stream magical finger of Jisho Abbey. What shocked him was not the power of the finger, but the unpredictable changes when Chen Pippi pointed it. The finger was pointing at the clear sky, but why did it fall behind him? Was this the no-boundary spirit of the academy? Cultivators cultivate heaven and earth and themselves. We need to use the psyche power in our bodies to control the qi of heaven and earth. Our bodies are the firewood, psyche power is the fire, heaven and earth are the stove, primordial qi is the ingredients such as vegetables, meat and fish, and fighting skills are the way to match the ingredient. Apart from the above factors, the most important thing to make a delicious dish is the heat control when cooking. If you ask a chef how to control the heat, an ordinary chef will probably tell you when to use what kind of fire and how long to cook the food. However, a truly brilliant chef will not be so rigid. He will know what the food in the pot is just by using his palm to scoop quickly in the steam room. This is an experience that he has gained after countless trials. This kind of experience is difficult to explain in words. Sometimes it can even make people feel that it is too mysterious. You can only feel and experience it on your own. Chun Pippi looked at Ning Ke in the cliff cave and said, "The heat control is the meaning." Ning Ke thought for a moment and understood what he wanted to say. He suddenly had a more intuitive understanding of the book that taught about the no-boundary spirit of the academy. Thinking of the example that Chun Pippi gave in the letter when he first entered the old library of the academy, he could not help but sigh and say, "Eating and sex are indeed human nature." You took these two things as examples, and it is really easy to understand. Third Sister and Chun Pippi were ordered by the headmaster of the academy to climb the cliff to teach, mainly to solve some problems that Ning Ke encountered in reading. The real understanding still depended on him. After Chun Pippi's explanation, Ning Ke decided to find time to digest it at night. There was no need to discuss too much at this time. He had been imprisoned in the cliff cave for 10 days and did not know what had happened in the world outside the academy. He asked, "Is Chang'an still peaceful recently?" Chun Pippi said, "When was Chang'an not peaceful? What are you concerned about?" Ning Ke said, "Someone in the imperial court seems to have a problem with me. I know that before I returned to the capital, someone even wanted to bring Sang Sang to the military ministry for interrogation. You were there." Chun Pippi nodded and said, "It's very simple. You don't need to worry about it." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "What about the 2 sadhus we met on the street a few days ago? Even if Dao Shi came from the Xiankong temple, he wouldn't have the ability to easily find me in Chang'an, where there are so many people. That encounter seems to have been set up." Chun Pippi frowned slightly and asked, "What are you suspecting?" "In Chang'an, only the Imperial Center Administration and the military could locate me so easily." Ning Ke said, "I don't know which of them informed the Xiankong temple." Hearing this, Chun Pippi frowned even more and said, "Helping outsiders to challenge the Academy's disciples who have entered the human realm? Even the military wouldn't have the guts to do that. Besides, aren't they worried that they would be scolded by the people of Chang'an after the matter is exposed?" Ning Ke had lived in the Tang army for many years. Of course, he knew the style of the military very well. He said, "As long as it's good for the empire, the generals won't care about anything." Chun Pippi stayed on the cliff platform and ate the white meat and pickled cabbage hot pot cooked by Sang Sang. He wiped his oily lips and shamelessly ignored the mess and the piles of dirty bowls. He hummed a little tune and walked down the cliff happily. No matter how Ning Ke cursed him, he didn't fall into the abyss. Facing the cliff and the cloud, Ning Ke scolded Chun Pippi loudly. Unfortunately, the cliff was beside him and the cloud in front of him was the void. He couldn't hear any echo at all, so he inevitably felt a little lonely. Without wasting any time, he walked back to the depth of the cliff cave and sat on the old futon. He sat cross-legged and meditated with his eyes closed. He continued to cultivate the Great Spirit in his body according to the cultivation method in the book. The white clouds between the cliff seemed to be indifferent. But Sang Sang, who was squatting on the edge of the cliff and washing the bowls, clearly felt the change in the cave. She looked back, but there was no morning fog at this time, so she couldn't see the scene before. When the night shrouded the cliff, Ning Ke slowly opened his eyes and ended today's cultivation. Looking at Sang Sang, who was standing in front of him with a plate of food, he shook his head and said, "I'm not hungry yet. Put it aside. If you're tired, go to rest early. If you're bored, talk with me for a while." Sang Sang knew that he had been worried that she would be bored and lonely. She also knew that with his temperament, he definitely wouldn't have any interest in chatting before he solved the problem. So she smiled and shook her head. She put the food beside him and walked back to the hut on the edge of the cliff. Ning Ke was still sitting cross-legged with his hands spread out on his knees. A yellowish fu paper appeared in his left palm. The fu paper was slowly disintegrating at a speed visible to the naked eye, releasing talisman intent into the air. His right palm was empty, but the light of the oil lamp was slightly deformed. The aura between the two palms were faintly different. The chi of heaven and earth condensed by the fu paper was above the left hand, while the pure Great Spirit overflowed from the right. He looked at the two invisible auras in front of him attentively. His deep psyche power slowly and carefully touched every fragment of the aura, trying to find something from it. The chi of heaven and earth condensed in his left hand and the Great Spirit in his right hand were both invisible and intangible like the void. But with his psyche power, he could clearly distinguish the difference. Since he was imprisoned in the cliff cave, Ning Ke had read the two books and practiced hard. Now he could clearly distinguish the aura of heaven and earth that seemed to be exactly the same but actually had slight differences. But he still couldn't unify the aura of heaven and earth that had different forms into the same state, even if it was as similar as possible. He couldn't even sort out his thoughts in this aspect. According to the concept in the book Examination of the Origin, the genuine chi in the body of the cultivators of the Devil's Doctrine and the Great Spirit in his body were actually a kind of chi of heaven and earth. If he could go back to the original state countless years ago and change the appearance of the Great Spirit into the original state, then he would be able to solve the inhibition in the cliff cave and have a perfect answer to the question given by the headmaster. But it was a pity that he was still at a level where he didn't know why. Not to mention that he couldn't deduce the specific operation method from what he knew. When he was challenged by Monk Guan Hai, he thought for half a day by the winter lake at the foot of Yanming Mountain and came up with a way to use the Great Spirit with talisman intent. And it was very effective. He could use the chaos of the primordial chi caused by the talisman intent to effectively cover the aura of the Great Spirit. But if he met a real grand cultivator, he would be seen through at a glance. As a core disciple of the headmaster of academy and a student of the second floor of the academy, even if he was seen through to join the devil, he probably wouldn't be killed immediately. But what if he was seen by others? On the futon in the depths of the cliff cave, Ning Ke looked at the two auras between his hands and thought for a long time. Although he looked calm on the surface, he was a little confused and frightened inside. Sang Sang walked back to the cave from the hut by the cliff and found a dry and quiet place. She opened the bedding and fell asleep. Ning Ke walked to her and quietly looked at her dark little face for a long time. Then he reached out to tuck the corner of the quilt and turned to go deeper into the cliff cave. These days, he had been thinking about solving the problem and didn't pay much attention to the cliff cave as a bedroom. At this time, his thoughts were a little chaotic, so he simply put these annoying things aside and walked slowly. The cliff cave wasn't big. There was an opening about 2 people's height on the side of the precipice. Inside there was a space about 10 steps wide. The cave walls weren't smooth, nor were there any jagged rocks. Nothing special could be seen. Going deeper, there was a long, slanted cave on the left and right side. These 2 caves were a little narrow. After walking for more than 10 steps, they came to the end. The deepest part was all hard and solid granite, and there was no possibility of going further. Ning Ke held the oil lamp and looked at the cave wall. There were countless fine cut lines on the stone wall. They might be formed naturally, but they looked more like they were cut by sharp metal objects. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. In the depths of the Tianqi Mountains in the northernmost part of the wilderness, in the abandoned front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, he had once seen the mottled sword marks left by youngest uncle on the bluestone wall. It was also because of those sword marks that he understood the true meaning of the Great Spirit and inherited youngest uncle's mantle, that he was able to defeat the terrifying Master Lotus. He remembered that youngest uncle had been imprisoned by his teacher for 3 years. No one came to visit him, let alone Sang Sang. He must have been very depressed. Could it be that these 2 narrow holes were cut by him with a sword? If these 2 narrow holes were also left by youngest uncle, then would these marks that looked like they were made by knives and axes, like the mottled sword marks in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine? Would they contain some aura and some hidden meaning? Ning Ke held the oil lamp and stood in the middle of the wall full of cut lines. He gradually became excited. He went to get a wooden stick and held the oil lamp in front of the narrow cave entrance. With the dim light, he began to carefully examine the cut marks on the stone wall that looked like the ripples in the lake. No matter if his idea was correct or not, he should at least try. He looked for a long time, but did not see any aura hidden in these cut lines. He did not find any pattern in these lines, but he still did not give up. After a moment of silence, he stretched out his hands and placed them on the wall. He slowly touched the stone wall, feeling the roughness coming from the surface of his palms. He touched from the entrance to the bottom of the cave, from his feet to the top of his head. He did not let go of any cut line and did not miss any area. He did this for the whole night. The night outside the cliff cave was gradually replaced by the light blue sky. His face was full of exhaustion, but there was no sign of discouragement. Try to finish the next chapter before 12:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 385. Ning Ke spent the whole night looking at the cut marks on the cave wall and touching them carefully like a blind man. His palms turned red and even started to peel, but he still couldn't find any secrets left by youngest uncle. After meditating for 10 whole days, forgetting to eat and sleep for 10 whole days, and forcefully suppressing the anxiety in his heart and pretending to be calm for 10 whole days, he was already exhausted to the extreme. His mental state was very tense, and after such a fruitless night, all these negative things suddenly burst out. His messy black hair draped over his shoulders, and he looked haggard. Looking at the 2 books on his knees, Ning Ke kept muttering to himself. But because his voice was hoarse and weak, no one could hear what he was saying clearly. Sang Sang walked into the cave with water and looked at him worriedly. Ning Ke took the towel and rubbed his face absent-mindedly. When the wet towel was used to wipe off the sticky and dried mud at the corner of his eyes, it tore a very thin cut, which made him frown in pain. The wet towel was cold. His cheeks turned red, not knowing whether it was because of fatigue or pain. The scarlet color appeared on his cheeks, which were slightly pale because of the lack of sunlight. It was not very good-looking, but looked very unhealthy, like a person who had been sick for a long time. His mental state was extremely bad, so the efficiency of reading and learning naturally became extremely low. He held the 2 books and tried to read them, but found that he seemed to be reading the classics in the old library, and he became the loser who couldn't cultivate again. The ink characters on the paper floated up mischievously and began to swim around like tadpoles, which could not be caught no matter how hard he tried. He closed the book helplessly, closed his eyes, and began to review what he had learned a few days ago. However, his mental state was so bad that even his brain seemed to become unclear, and there was a big deviation in his memory. When he thought about some problems in the book, he couldn't remember what senior sister Yulien said at that time, even though senior sister Yulien had already given the answer the day before yesterday. Depressed and annoyed, he naturally said what he thought. His hoarse and tired voice was so vague that he was completely murmuring to himself to vent his emotions. However, he didn't expect that Sang Sang, who had been sitting quietly beside him, would suddenly say something, which was the answer given by senior sister Yulien the day before yesterday. Ning Ke was slightly stunned, and then he remembered that his little handmaiden's memory had always been extraordinary. Sang Sang began to repeat what Yu Lien and Chen Pippi said 2 days ago. However, Ning Ke was in such a bad state that he reluctantly waved his hand after listening for a while, indicating that there was no need to continue. He threw the 2 books beside the futon like garbage, stood up, stretched, and yawned. He slowly walked to the cliff cave entrance and looked at the world outside. The cliff behind the back mountain of the academy was extremely beautiful, even breathtakingly beautiful. However, even if the lines on the precipice were like knives that pierced people's hearts, they were not real knives after all. After looking at them for a long time, they would always be the same lines. The azure sky in front of the cliff was as if it would never change. It stayed there quietly and peacefully. The initial beauty had now gradually turned into the dull blue paint of the worst painter. The flowing clouds and deep fog at the waist of the cliff were also the same. Looking at the scenery outside the cliff cave, Ning Ke felt slightly cold. It had only been 10 days, and he had been busy with cultivation these days, so he didn't have much time to enjoy the scenery. Now he was already tired of it. If he was really imprisoned in the cliff cave for 10 months or even 10 years, how could he survive? Just when he began to feel empty, lonely, and cold, there suddenly came a lively sound on the stone path below the cliff plateau. The sound of clothes rustling and footsteps was more of a quarrel. With the addition of these voices, the scenery of the precipice, which seemed to be eternally unchanging, suddenly flowed and became lively for some reason. It had a completely different beauty from before. It turned out that emptiness and loneliness had nothing to do with the scenery, but only with people. It's too hard to climb. It's too terrible. 12th brother said we couldn't come up. I said we should call youngest brother at the waterfall and show our friendship. But you just had to climb up here. 9th brother Beigong Weiyang complained while panting. He angrily waved the antique flute in his hand, as if he wanted to drive all his companions down the cliff. The mountain wind drilled into the flute and then out, making a low whimper, as if it was crying, but more like his panting at this time. 5th brother wiped the sweat from his forehead and took down the dripping wood chessboard on his back. He looked at him and said with a sneer, "But we finally climbed up." Beigong Weiyang carefully moved 2 steps to the edge of the cliff and looked down. Then he quickly stepped back several steps and patted his chest with lingering fear. He said, "I'm just worried that I can't go down later." Ning Ke was very touched that the 7 senior brothers came together to visit him. He stood at the cliff cave entrance and excitedly waited for them to show concern for him. Unexpectedly, after waiting for a long time, he found that they only cared about bickering. Finally, he couldn't help but remind them loudly, "Hey, hey, I'm here." The disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy were often crazy about their own things. In addition, the back of the mountain was too big, so they couldn't see each other every day. Sometimes they couldn't even see each other for dozens of days. But the friendship between fellow disciples would not be weakened because of this. Ning Ke was the latest to enter the sect and was the youngest younger brother. Naturally, he was loved and taken care of by his senior brothers. The senior brothers worried that the youngest brother was imprisoned in the cliff cave and lonely and complained too much. So they specially went to the headmaster of the academy and got permission to visit him. Then they came together. However, when they really saw the haggard and pale youngest brother in the cliff cave, they didn't know what to say. Because no matter from which angle they looked at it, these crazy people in the back of the mountain of the academy were really not good at comforting people. Everyone looked at Wang Qi because they all knew that he liked thinking, and the most important thing was that he was the 11th and the youngest among all the people who went up the mountain. So this difficult task was naturally given to him. Wang Qi was silent for a long time and silently organized the words in his heart. Finally, he thought of how to say it. He squeezed out a fake smile with difficulty and looked at Ning Ke seriously. He said, "Since the headmaster doesn't stop us from coming up the mountain to see you, then we will come to see you every day." In this way, even if you really can't come out for the rest of your life, it is not too troublesome. You can also take the opportunity to study in peace. Ning Kei's face suddenly darkened and he said, 11th brother, I'm not a wildflower in the forest who only knows how to talk, but only knows how to talk. Can you say something auspicious? 5th brother hurriedly came forward with the chessboard. He smiled and sat in front of the line at the entrance of the cliff cave. He threw the urn containing the black pieces to Ning Kei and said, the only way to solve your worries is to play chess. Ning Kei held the urn and said helplessly, my body can't cross the line. How can I play chess? 5th brother thought it was reasonable and reached out to take the urn back. Then he said, you tell me, and I will let 8th brother play for you. 8th brother lightly flicked the wide sleeves of his academy uniform and floated over like an immortal. Then he sat beside 5th brother and glanced at Ning Quebec. He said, youngest brother, although it is to relieve your boredom and amuse you, you have to be serious. Although I am playing for you, I still don't want to lose to him. Beigong Weiyang sneered and said, I heard that the headmaster gave youngest brother 3 books. Looking at his expression now, I am afraid that he has consumed a lot of energy. How can he have the energy to play chess with you? Ning Kei thought that this sentence was really appropriate and reliable. Beigong Weiyang turned to look at Ning Kei and said, youngest brother, let Shimin and I play a song to help you calm down. Ning Kei was silent for a while and looked at 5th brother. He said, senior brother, I will go first. The sound of zither and flute was elegant and distant. The chess pieces fell on the wooden chessboard and made a clear and moving sound. From time to time, 5th brother's angry rebuke and 8th brother's incessant support for Ning Kei could be heard. Countless sounds mixed together and there was no beauty to speak of. It was noisy and indescribable. At this time, the cliff cave was not lonely at all. It was as lively as the vegetable market in the southern city of Chang, and in the morning. Ning Kei held a black chess piece and thought in a daze, is this also a retreat? He suddenly missed the previous emptiness, loneliness and coldness. 4th brother, who had been silent, finally couldn't stand it anymore. He sternly drove those crazy people out of the cave and then looked at Ning Kei, who was relieved. He said, everyone is just being kind. Ning Kei sincerely replied, I can understand. 4th brother said again, what we have learned is not helpful for you to break through. Today we are here to encourage you. What do you want? Ning Kei smiled and shook his head. He was going to ask Sang Sang to make tea for senior brothers. Although he was now a prisoner of the academy, there was indeed some good tea in the hut. However, when he looked at Sang Sang, he found that the little girl was standing on the edge of the cliff with 6th brother. They were pointing at the hut and talking about something. 6th brother kept nodding honestly. When 6th brother walked back to the cliff cave, everyone knew what he and Sang Sang had been discussing. They were going to completely renovate the hut. Not only did they strengthen and renovate it, but the most important thing was to build a rain corridor to directly connect the hut with the cliff cave. If it was on flat ground, such a large-scale renovation project was naturally not a big deal. However, the cliff plateau was suspended between the precipices of the back mountain, and the transportation of materials was a big problem. Beigong Weiyang looked at the steep and narrow stone path, and his face suddenly became extremely pale. His hunch was indeed right. 4th brother looked at everyone coldly and said, you all have to do it. Although they were all infatuated with music, chess, flowers and trees, they were all powerhouses who had already entered the upper see-through state as the core disciples of the headmaster of academy. New trees, old stones, and countless materials were continuously sent to the cliff plateau and then handed over to 6th brother to build by himself. In less than half a day, this seemingly difficult work was successfully completed. The hut on the edge of the cliff was 1 story higher and was fixed by 14 beams against the cliff. Wang Qi secretly went to the hut on the other side of the mountain and stole many frost-colored long grass that the headmaster liked the most. He locked them on the beams with thin iron chains. It not only looked beautiful and elegant, but also there was no need to worry about any storms in the future. The roofed corridor between the hut and the cliff cave was more exquisitely designed. Thin trees without their barks were hanging in the air, covered with 6 straw mats that seventh sister had robbed from second brother's yard. The straw mats were torn with many small holes, and thin green vines were running through them, adding a lot of business to the sky. Ninkei stood at the entrance of the cave and looked at the new and extremely beautiful cliff plateau. He looked at those senior brothers who were covered with mud and sweat and were giggling at the green vines in the rain corridor. He suddenly felt that the slightly cold wind in the mountain became warm. I have to get up at 5:30 tomorrow to send my friend to the airport, so I have to go to sleep now. Today I will only write 2 chapters, and tomorrow I will write 4 chapters, maybe more. There are only 4 days left, and there are 60 or 70,000 words left. I have to work harder. Ninkei also has to work harder tomorrow. He will succeed soon, and I will strive for success. I cry silently. Zhou Tue is the first. Thank you very much. It is past midnight now. Please vote for me with your recommendation vote. Thank you very much. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 386. The green vines were not dense, and there were many gaps in the middle. The sunlight was reflected by the fine leaves, changing brightness and brightness, which made a completely different scenery. Ninkei expressed his most sincere gratitude to his senior brothers and asked them to stay for dinner, but they laughed at him. Everyone laughed and said, "Even if you live in a hut on the edge of the cliff, youngest brother is still a poor prisoner, not a real hermit. Why do you have to pretend to be a host?" The senior brothers, who were dirty and looked like laborers, waved goodbye to him. They held the cliff wall beside the stone path, rubbed their sore necks, and groaned as they walked down the mountain. Because sixth brother had to finish the renovation of the hut, he stayed for a longer time. It was not until the sun was setting in the west that he packed his things and prepared to leave. When saying goodbye, Ninkei asked about the thing he had asked him a few days ago. Sixth brother said, "It's not too difficult to cast 3 knives into one. The design has been completed and the process has been arranged. But you asked for all 3 knives in it, so the blade of the new knife will inevitably be too heavy. It's difficult to meet the requirements with ordinary materials. You need a kind of ball ink powder. The Imperial Court has sent people to the southern mine to dig it, and they should be back next month." He calculated the time and then said, "If the materials are all ready, they should be out before summer." After leaving Min Mountain for the city of Wei, Ninkei's usual weapon was the 3 slender padeos. With the 3 padeos, he killed countless horse gang on the grassland. They also helped him fight all the way from the frontier fortress to Chang and city, into the rainy night of Spring Breeze Pavilion, and then back to the wilderness. It was the continuous battles in the wilderness that made him regret to find that the 3 padeos could no longer give him the most firm confidence and the most powerful support in the battle of cultivation powerhouses like in the past years. Instead, they dragged him back because of their fragility. Currently, the most powerful weapons in Ninkei's hands were the primordial 13 arrows and the Fu paper. Fourth brother and sixth brother had already repaired the primordial 13 arrows perfectly for him, but he still wanted a suitable close-range weapon. Because of their past relationship and familiarity, the saber was naturally his first choice. A few days ago, Ninkei had solemnly handed over the 3 slender padeos that he regarded as his life partners to sixth brother, asking him to help him combine the 3 padeos into one. No matter how one looked at it, this request did not meet the standards of smelting and casting. It was too simple and even a little boring. Therefore, he didn't hold much hope towards this matter, but he had always held a sliver of hope in the depths of his heart. At this moment, when he heard his 6 senior brother's words, he couldn't help but be greatly pleasantly surprised. Although the 6th senior brother was a man of few words, His heart was as passionate as the fire in a furnace, and his character was as pure as refined steel. He would never speak if he was not confident. Sixth brother looked at him and said with an honest smile, "Junior brother, is there anything else you need to do? Now I can't wait to see what the saber that you have made looks like. How can I have the mood to care about other things?" Ning Ke said with a smile. Suddenly, he saw Sang Sang, who was standing under the green vines in the rain corridor tying the thread. Suddenly, he thought of something and slightly raised his eyebrows. Back then by the Daming Lake in the wilderness, he and Mo Shanshan were still no match for the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, especially when the depths of the water fish that Yi Hongyu had summoned shone with thousands of rays of light, illuminating the verdant valley and the quiet lake. He actually had the idea that he couldn't fight against it at all. Ning Ke remembered many details of that battle very clearly. But the scene that really left a long time of fear in his heart was the scene of the rising sun on the lake surface. If Mo Shanshan hadn't used the divine talisman to evaporate the lake water and turn it into mist at the critical moment, which slightly dimmed the light, he would probably have been killed by Yi Hongyu at that time. Later, Ning Ke found out that Yi Hongyu had displayed the divine skill of the West Hill Divine Palace. Even she had just comprehended it for a short time, but it already had such great power. As a disciple of the Academy, he naturally had to think about how to fight against the Peach Mountain. As the successor of the youngest uncle, Ning Ke had an innate reason to fight against the West Hill Divine Palace. As a person who had joined the devil, he had to think about how to defeat the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism all the time. Especially after he had destroyed Prince Longqing, he believed that the people in the Divine Hall must be looking forward to defeating or even destroying him. These things would naturally be realized by Yi Hongyu. Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu had fought, talked, and traveled together. He knew that the Tao addict, who was proficient in all kinds of cultivation methods, had an unfathomable state and potential. He also knew that she was probably one of the few cultivators in the world who was proficient in fighting skills and essence like himself. Now his state had suddenly increased and he had made rapid progress. But he felt that Yi Hongyu's progress would definitely not be slower than his. Therefore, he had to think of some ways to narrow the gap between them. The first thing he had to do was to find a way to deal with Haotian's divine light. Ning Ke asked, "Senior brother, there is something that I don't know if it can be made." Sixth brother liked making things all his life, and he knew that the youngest brother in the cave often had some unimaginable ideas. Hearing this, he became happy and said, "Did you design it?" "I don't think so." Ning Ke was a little hesitant. He raised his hands and put them on his eyes. Then he began to describe in a low voice what the thing looked like and what characteristics it had. Listening to Ning Ke's description, sixth brother thought for a moment and regretfully shook his head. He said, "It is much easier to make than that knife. There is nothing special about it and it is not difficult. It can be made in 10 days. When you come out of seclusion to get the knife, you can take it with you." After seeing sixth brother off, Ning Ke sat at the entrance of the cliff cave. He held his chin and looked at Sang Sang, who was busy in the corridor. Suddenly, he laughed proudly. Sixth brother felt that the thing was too simple and not challenging, so he felt a little regretful. But Ning Ke was very happy. Because if that thing could really deal with Haotian's divine light, then Sang Sang, as the successor of the divine priest of light, would not be his opponent even if she knew the divine skill. Of course, it was very important to win the battle with the Tao addict of the West Hill Divine Palace or to keep his life. But to win the competition with his little handmaiden, or to keep the dignity of a man and a parent, was the most important thing for Ning Quebec. The hut by the cliff was renovated. The thin branches of the green vines in the corridor swayed with the wind. The beautiful cliff scenery suddenly had many different sceneries and the atmosphere of life. The arrival of senior brothers made the loneliness of being abandoned by the world and the worst memories of wandering in the world with Sang Sang disappear. Ning Ke's state of mind was much calmer. He continued to read and meditate, and was no longer as restless and depressed as he was a few days ago. The most important thing was the change of mentality. When sixth brother left, he casually said that he wanted to take that thing when he broke through the barrier to get the knife. He did not feel any self-pity because of this sentence and naturally agreed. Because he had already thought it through. Since he had made up his mind to Sang that night, if he still could not find a way to break the inhibition set by the headmaster of academy after 3 months, he would directly destroy the great spirit in his body. This recognition or decision seemed simple, but in fact it contained a terrible determination and firmness. Ordinary people's state of mind could not bear this kind of pain, but Ning-Ke could. Because he could now calm down. On the 21st day of being imprisoned in the cliff cave, third sister Yulian came to solve his doubts and teach him as promised. But this time, there was an equally charming figure beside her. Ning-Ke looked at Tang Xiaotong's childish face and said in shock, "You really want to stay in the academy? Did the teacher really accept you? Do I have to call you younger sister in the future?" Tang Xiaotong laughed and said, "Isn't it good to have a younger sister?" Ning-Ke said, "I am now imprisoned in the cliff, of course I can't have a younger sister. I feel a little suffocated thinking about it. If you sing a few more desolate man-folk songs, I may vomit blood." No one beside the cliff cave could understand his complaints, not even Sang. Yulian smiled and said, "Little girl is too naughty. Quickly greet your youngest uncle." Ning-Ke's eyes moved back and forth between senior sister and Tang Xiaotong. After a moment of hesitation, he asked uncertainly, "Tang Xiaotong is senior sister's disciple?" Yulian nodded calmly. Ning-Ke was shocked. Tang Xiaotong was a girl from the Devil's Doctrine, and her brother Tang was the current world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine. The academy actually kept her. Whether it was the headmaster of the academy accepting her as a disciple, or third sister accepting her as a disciple, it was the irrefutable evidence that the academy protected the Devil's Doctrine in the eyes of the world. Yulian looked at Ning-Ke and said lightly, "Younger brother, you have seen my disciple, and you also know that her identity is a little special. So try not to mention her in the future." If the news that the academy had accepted a disciple from the Devil's Doctrine as a disciple spread to the world, it would definitely cause a great disturbance. The West Hill Divine Palace and hundreds of millions of Haotian believers in the world would definitely not allow this to happen. No matter how powerful the academy was, it could not defeat the whole world and the omnipresent Haotian divine light in this world. Otherwise, how could those things have happened in the past? Ning-Ke thought of the great spirit in his body and youngest uncle who was killed by heaven's punishment. After a moment of silence, he looked at third sister and said solemnly, "That's how it should be." He looked at Tang Xiaotong and found that the girl's childish expression was calm. It seemed that she did not know how much trouble and danger she would bring to the people in this mountain by studying in the academy. He wanted to remind her, but he thought that he had already joined the devil and brought a lot of unsolved troubles to the academy, which forced the headmaster to imprison him here. He could not help but laugh at himself. The Tao addict Yi Hongyu and her brother, the world wayfarer of the Jishou Abbey, have seen Tang Xiaotong. We must be careful in the future and try not to let her leave the academy. Ning-Ke reminded Yulian. Yulian said calmly, "Since this girl has become my disciple, how can she leave the academy if she can't kill Yi Hongyu? This is the first chapter for today. I will definitely finish the second chapter before 9 o'clock. I am pressuring myself. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 387. Hearing this, Tang Xiaotong opened her eyes wide and asked confusedly, "But I always covered my face with a fox's tail. How could they recognize me?" Yulian looked at her new student and said slowly, "Everyone has their own unique mark, especially for cultivators. You can think of it as a smell." Ning-Ke did not participate in the discussion. He sat silently in the cliff cave and looked calm, but his heart was in turmoil because of third sister's words. When he was still an ordinary student in the front yard, he met Yu Lian in the sword forest. Yu Lian showed her disapproval when she knew that he wanted to enter the second floor of the academy. She said that if he gave up, she could introduce a powerhouse who was not weaker than Liu Bai to be his teacher. Liu Bai, the Sage of Sword, was recognized as the most powerful person in the world. Yu Lian lived in the academy and stayed away from people all year round. How could she know a powerhouse who was not weaker than Liu Bai? Ning Ke clearly remembered his shock when he heard this and her sigh of pity when he said that he still wanted to enter the second floor of the academy. What Yu Lian said today sounded ordinary, but it was full of confidence and pride. Because it meant that since Tang Xiaotang was her student, it would be unreasonable if she could not defeat or even kill the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, in the future. Her expression was still tranquil. She was not deliberately arrogant in front of anyone. Instead, she had casually said those words based on some kind of almost instinctive self-judgment. It was this kind of casual and ordinary that made her more unfathomable. Thinking of the conversation in the sword forest, Ning Ke could not help but feel a little confused. Everyone in the back of the mountain of the academy knew that third sister's cultivation was in the upper state of see-through. Where did her calm confidence come from? Ning Ke thought about it and finally concluded that it was the common temperament of the disciples in the back of the mountain of the academy. Third sister was ranked only after eldest brother and second brother, so she had the right to be unreasonably confident. He said sincerely, "Senior sister, you are the first person in the back of the mountain to accept a student. Congratulations." Yu Lian said, "It's all the teacher's arrangement." She looked back at Tang Xiaotang and said calmly, "Come and greet uncle." Tang Xiaotang walked to the front of the cliff cave and stood a little outside the line. She stopped smiling and bowed with a solemn expression. "Xiaotang greets youngest martial uncle." Ning Ke noticed that the little girl's old fur coat had been replaced by a brand new academy uniform. The old leather boots on her feet had been replaced by a pair of small green cloth shoes, which looked very refreshing. As he was sizing her up, he suddenly heard the 3 words youngest martial uncle. For some reason, his mood suddenly became extremely comfortable. A moment later, he understood where this wonderful feeling came from. Firstly, he didn't have to worry about having a junior sister. Secondly, he was 1 generation older than Tang Xiaotang. Wouldn't that mean that the Devil's Doctrine World Wayfarer would have to respect him in the future? The most important thing was that for the academy, youngest uncle was a title with special meaning. There was a youngest uncle in the back of the mountain of the academy. He was the most remarkable figure in the world and a legendary figure that second brother still worship. Now Ning Ke had become the youngest uncle in the eyes of the disciples of the next generation. In every generation, there was only 1 junior brother, so naturally, there could only be 1 junior uncle. Thinking that from now on, there might be even more people who would constantly greet him respectfully and call him junior uncle, he felt very proud. After bowing, Tang Xiaotang straightened up and found that Ning Ke's expression kept changing, as if he was extremely intoxicated. Naturally, she couldn't guess what he was thinking at this time. They had met in the wilderness and reunited in Chang'an. She was most familiar with Ning Ke in the academy. Moreover, they were similar in age, so it was really difficult to treat him as a real teacher. She tilted her head and looked at him. She felt that his expression was so funny that she couldn't help giggling. Ning Ke looked at her and said, "Call me youngest martial uncle again." Of course, Tang Xiaotang didn't want to call him youngest martial uncle. In her opinion, a weak and shameless guy like Ning Ke was not qualified to be her teacher. Previously, because of the teacher's order, and she had to meet everyone when she first entered the academy, she restrained her temper and bowed to call him youngest martial uncle. "Call me youngest martial uncle." Ning Ke didn't notice the change in her expression. He said happily, "I like to hear people call me youngest martial uncle." I'm the only third-generation disciple of the Academy. Tang Xiaotang gritted her teeth and looked at him. There's no one else. Ning Ke said, so you should come to the cliff cave to visit me more often and call me youngest martial uncle. Tang Xiaotang said angrily, if you do that again, I won't come to play with you anymore. Ning Ke said proudly, now I'm more senior than you. You have to listen to me. Tang Xiaotang said angrily, don't forget that I'm the first among the third-generation disciples of the Academy. That means I'll be the eldest sister of the Academy in the future. Youngest martial uncle, if you don't want your children or beloved disciples to be bullied by me for the rest of their lives, you'd better not bully me too much now. Ning Ke was startled and said with emotion, the prosperous Central Plains is indeed a place that erodes bones and souls. A little girl from the wilderness who knows nothing about worldly affairs has become sly in such a short time. It's really boring. Tang Xiaotang ignored him and walked to Sang Sang. She took her little hand and pulled her into the hut. She began to care about how Sang Sang was doing on the cliff plateau and what she needed her to do. Sang Sang was not used to her cheerfulness and enthusiasm. After a while, she remembered that they had agreed to be friends outside the hut on the other side of the mountain a month ago. Her little face showed a happy smile. She told Tang Xiaotang about her life on the cliff plateau. Although it sounded boring, it seemed that everything was fine. Tang Xiaotang felt relieved after making sure that her best friend was not bullied by youngest martial uncle Ning Ke and did not suffer any hardship. She pulled Sang Sang to sit on the ground and began to play. Sang Sang was less than 15 years old, and Tang Xiaotang was even younger. Both of them were very simple. They were actually still little girls. They played stone chess, which was the favorite game of children. At the entrance of the cliff cave, senior sister Yulian was looking through the learning problems Ning Ke had memorized these days. After a moment of silence, she raised her head and began to explain some of the principles in a low voice. Ning Ke listened attentively to his senior sister's elegant and soft voice. He found that many things that he could not understand were suddenly enlightened after her concise explanation and reminder. It was obvious that Yu Lian did not understand the Great Spirit, but she was very knowledgeable about the circulation of the qi of heaven and earth, especially the subtle differences between different materials. Moreover, she was extremely knowledgeable, so she could easily tell Ning Ke about the cultivation past or exquisite metaphors. What shocked Ning Ke the most was that this senior sister's way of thinking was so ethereal. She could often find the possibility in the impossible, and see the beautiful scenery in the end of the world. Time passed slowly, and the sunlight outside the precipice gradually became stronger. Ning Ke was immersed in the scenery that his senior sister had pointed out for him, and could not extricate himself. His admiration for his senior sister had reached an extreme level. He thought to himself that she was indeed a woman who was second only to his two senior brothers in the back of the mountain of the Academy. Whether it was knowledge, wisdom or vision, she was so powerful that even Chern Pippi was not as good as her. Yu Lian's lessons were always concise and clear without any nonsense. It was just past noon and she had already answered all of Ning Ke's questions. Without waiting for Ning Ke's thanks or any small talk, she calmly stood up and called out Tang Xiaotang in the hut. She nodded slightly to the cave and then floated down the mountain. Between the narrow and steep cliff, two petite figures and two loose academy uniforms of the same style appeared and disappeared from time to time. It did not take long for them to arrive at the waterfall. Previously in the hut on the cliff plateau, Tang Xiaotang played with Sang Sang and asked her to play stone chess with her. Stone chess was a simple game that all children from the wilderness to the Great River Kingdom could play. Because of its simplicity, there were often no rules for winning or losing. However, she had not won a single round. Tang Xiaotang was a strong-willed and competitive girl from the Devil's Doctrine. At the beginning, she lost more than 10 rounds in a row. If it were someone else, they would probably feel bored and give up in the face of such a simple game. However, she refused to give up and insisted on playing with Sang Sang. In the end, she lost 129 rounds. It was such a simple game of stone chess, but she had lost 129 rounds in a row. Tang Xiaotang could not figure out how it happened. No matter how strong-willed she was, she could not help but show some frustration on her face. She looked at her teacher and asked in distress, "Teacher, am I stupid?" Yu Lian walked slowly from the edge of the cliff to the narrow gorge. She said, "You are not stupid. You just foolishly chose the wrong opponent." Tang Xiaotang followed her from a distance and asked curiously, "I know Sang Sang is the successor of the divine priest of light. But playing chess is not cultivation. How could she not win a round?" Yu Lian said calmly, "In the past decades, only the divine priest of light possessed true wisdom on the Peach Mountain of the West Hill Divine Palace. The successor he chose was naturally extraordinary. As for why she couldn't even win a single round, it's because she treated you as a true friend. That's why she was very serious." Hearing that Sang Sang treated her as a real friend, Tang Xiaotang showed a happy smile on her childish face. She bounced like a naughty stone and chased after Yu Lian. Her previous frustration and sadness were blown into the abyss by the wind in the gorge and could not be found anymore. Thinking that her good friend stayed on the cliff all day long, Tang Xiaotang suddenly became unhappy again. She complained, "Ning Ke is such a shameless guy. It's okay that he is imprisoned, but he is also a burden to Sang Sang." Yu Lian stopped and said, "He is your youngest uncle. How can you call him by his name?" Tang Xiaotang stuck out her tongue behind her and explained, "I am used to calling him Ning Quebec." Yu Lian said calmly, "If you do it again after teaching, you will be punished according to the rules of the academy." Tang Xiaotang was slightly surprised and asked, "How?" Yu Lian said, "Walk to the top of the waterfall and then jump down." Tang Xiaotang looked at the silver waterfall not far away and said sadly, "It seems a bit high." Yu Lian said, 129 times. This is the second chapter. I will try to finish the third chapter before 11 o'clock. I can do it. I am the new generation of mountain monster. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 388. Tang Xiaotang followed her brother's advice and traveled thousands of miles to the south from the wilderness. She went through all kinds of hardships and finally arrived at Chang'an. Then she met the headmaster of the academy and finally entered the academy. According to their original plan, she should directly become a disciple of the headmaster of the academy. However, for some unknown reason, the headmaster of the academy did not expel her from the academy or accept her as a student because of her identity as a member of the Devil's Doctrine. Instead, he handed her over to Yu Lian and asked her to accept her as a disciple. For the world, the second floor of the academy was still mysterious, but it was a place that connected the two worlds. Especially for the siblings who were already at the top of the cultivation world, many people in the back of the mountain of the academy had heard of it. Not to mention people like Mr. First and Mr. Second, or Chen Pippi, who was regarded as a treasure by Haotian Taoism. Even people like Beigong Weiyang were famous in their own fields and countries before they entered the academy to cultivate. However, they were gradually forgotten by the world as time passed. However, not many people knew that there was a third sister on the second floor of the academy. Her name was Yu Lian. The headmaster of the academy ordered Tang Xiaotang to become a disciple of Yu Lian. The little girl was shocked and her first thought was to refuse. The female professor in the loose green uniform was quiet, elegant, and amiable, but her realm was not profound. She was only about the same as her, maybe even weaker than her. She was the woman who wanted to be the strongest in the world, so how could she accept a woman whose realm was weaker than her as her teacher? However, when she was about to refuse, Yu Lian glanced at her indifferently. The eyes of the third sister of the academy were just like her, soft and fragile. However, they had their own grace and grace. Tang Xiaotang suddenly felt that she did not dare to disobey. Tang Xiaotang had lived in the cold region of the far north since she was a child, and lived a hard life. The bloodline of the desolate man and the education of the devil's doctrine made her naturally easygoing. At a young age, she dared to carry a huge blood-red machete and fight with the terrifying snowfield direwolves. She dared to fight with Yi Hongyu, and even cut the ice peach condensed by Prince Long Qing. However, such a fearless girl from the devil's doctrine felt fear when facing Yu Lian's calm and gentle eyes. She did not dare to be presumptuous at all. "You want me to jump 129 times?" Looking at her teacher's petite back, Tang Xiaotang was so shocked that her voice trembled. On the one hand, it was because the punishment was too severe, and on the other hand, it was exactly the same number of times she lost to Sang Sang on the cliff platform. She didn't mention it, so how did she know? Could it be that when she answered Ning Kei's questions at the entrance of the cliff cave, she had completely grasped the situation on the cliff plateau? Yu Lian turned around and said, "You knew that you were no match for Sang Sang in stone chess, but you kept on fighting and refused to admit defeat. You lost 129 games in a row. You look brave, but you are actually stupid. If you are always so hot-headed, how can you defeat Yi Hongyu?" Tang Xiaotang stubbornly said, "Even if I'm stupid, I can't admit defeat. If I keep playing like this, who knows when I might really win a round." Yu Lian said calmly, "I know you can't change your temperament, so I'm not going to correct it. Since you insist that courage is the most important thing in the world, I will try my best to train and stabilize your courage from now on. Letting you jump into the waterfall is one of the things I will do. Are you afraid?" This was the simplest way to provoke her. Of course, Tang Xiaotang understood it. However, even though she knew this, she still could not control her emotions and stubbornly walked to the waterfall. From this point of view, as Ning Kei sighed with emotion, Yu Lian was probably a very good teacher. She understood her student's temperament and could make good use of it. It's easy to jump from the waterfall. We all know that she has been cultivating the devil's doctrine since she was a child. Even if she is injured, it won't be fatal. However, it's difficult to climb up the slippery cliff. Moreover, Senior Sister asked her to climb up from the waterfall. You didn't see how big the water was and how slippery the moss on the stones was. That girl jumped and climbed for a whole night. Her face was swollen and there were small wounds all over her body. She looked miserable. "Isn't Second Brother's courtyard close to the waterfall?" He was the first to raise an objection. He thought that teaching a student like this was really a trick. In the end, even eldest brother stood up and pleaded for Tang Xiaotang. But guess what? Senior Sister didn't even give face to the two senior brothers. She's still jumping now. Speaking of which, this girl is really stupid and stubborn. When she fell from the waterfall, she didn't make a sound and didn't beg for mercy. It was as if she was angry with Senior Sister. How many times did she jump? It was already late at night when I arrived. I don't know how many times she jumped before, but I saw her jump more than 30 times. It should be almost 60 times. But it's still less than half of Senior Sister's requirement. 129 times. Even if she really completed it, I'm afraid she would be crippled. I really don't know what Senior Sister is thinking. She usually looks so quiet and gentle, but after taking in a female student, she became so terrible. Do you think there are some emotional problems hidden in it? On the 22nd day of Ning Kei's imprisonment in the cliff cave, Chun Pippi climbed up to the precipice plateau according to the arrangement of the headmaster of academy to explain the no-boundary spirit of the academy. However, it was obvious that this fat man was not in the mood to preach today. He sat outside the cliff cave, waving his arms and spitting saliva, expressing the most painful objection and anger towards what had happened in the back of the mountain of the academy since yesterday morning. After listening for a while, Ning Kei roughly understood what had happened. He couldn't help but feel a little anxious when he thought that Tang Xiaotang had fallen into such a miserable state because she didn't call him youngest uncle. He had long noticed that Chun Pippi's mental state had some problems today. He frowned and asked, "According to the tone you used when you first warned me, I thought that you wanted all the remnants of the devil's doctrine to die. Why do I feel that it's not the case after listening to you today?" Chun Pippi was startled and said angrily, "Now that she has entered the academy and is a disciple of Third Sister, she is our academy's disciple and our niece. What does she have to do with the devil's doctrine? If that's the case, then it seems that I should kill you first." Ning Ke sneered and said, "Come in if you can." Chun Pippi said shamelessly, "Come out if you can." Sang Sang walked to the front of the cave with a tea tray and silently put down 2 cups of tea. Then she looked at the two separately. The two were a little embarrassed. They picked up the teacups and remained silent. Sang Sang shook her head and said, "You'd better change your words." Then she hesitated for a moment and looked at Ning Ke in the cave. She said, "I want to see her." Ning Ke knew that she wanted to see Tang Xiaotang and said, "Since she is a friend, of course you should go." After Sang Sang left, Chun Pippi suddenly asked, "You met Tang Xiaotang in the wilderness. Why is this little girl so stubborn?" Ning Ke began to tell his impression of Tang Xiaotang. Chun Pippi held the teacup and drank it tastelessly. He was silent for a long time when he thought of the little girl he met at the south gate of Chang'an City. Then he looked at the white clouds between the cliffs and frowned. After thinking for a moment, he said, "Since she is a member of the devil's doctrine, how can she be so cute?" Ning Ke never had the concept that Taoism and the devil's doctrine could not coexist. Now that he had joined the devil, he naturally felt this view to the extreme. He looked at Chun Pippi and said sarcastically, "Tao Addict Yi Hongyu is the daughter of Haotian Taoism. Then why is she so terrible in our eyes?" Chun Pippi murmured, "That makes sense." Ning Ke looked at his round face and suddenly thought of a possibility. After hesitating for a moment, he tentatively asked, "You watched Tang Xiaotang jump from the waterfall last night to this morning?" Chun Pippi nodded his head. Ning Ke gasped and said, "Although this little girl does have long black hair and can fight evenly with Yi Hongyu, she is extremely powerful. Except for her overly powerful brother, she fits your imagination of a perfect partner in all aspects. But I have to remind you that she is a girl of the devil's doctrine. If the devil's doctrine was in its heyday, she could undoubtedly become the saintess of the devil's doctrine. But you are the precious young master of Haotian Taoism. As the saying goes, Taoism and the devil's doctrine cannot coexist. The academy can stand in the middle, but how can you stand?" Chun Pippi was in a trance and did not fully understand what Ning Ke said. He subconsciously replied with a sneer, "Who was laughing at my decadent ideas of Taoism and the devil?" Ning Ke sighed and said, "But have you ever thought that she is 1 generation younger than us and you are her 12th uncle? Will it work? Will the teacher agree?" Chun Pippi finally understood what Ning Ke was talking about. His chubby body bounced up from the ground like an elastic fish ball. He blushed and pointed at Ning Ke in the cave. He shouted, "Appreciation! Don't you know what appreciation is? Why is your brain full of such filthy things?" Ning Ke said, "Anger out of shame can't convince my opponent. I can only expose my true feelings." Chun Pippi said bitterly, "That little girl is only 14 or 15 years old. Can you not be such a beast?" Ning Ke sneered and said, "I think you are worse than a beast." Chun Pippi suddenly thought of something and looked at him with disdain. He said, "Do you think everyone in the world is like you? You can be a beast and lay your hands on your own handmaiden?" Ning Ke could tolerate other things, but he could not tolerate this. He shouted, "Damn fatty! If I can get out, I will teach you a lesson today." Chun Pippi sneered and said, "Come out if you can." Ning Ke said angrily, "Come out if you can." Suddenly, the two of them shut up at the same time and looked at the edge of the cliff platform with fear. They were very worried that Sang Sang would suddenly come back and hear this childish conversation again. The two of them looked at each other awkwardly and waved their hands to show that they did not mind. I didn't walk the dog at night. I'm going to walk the dog. This is the 3rd chapter. The 4th chapter will definitely be very late after midnight. Don't stay up late. Let's read it tomorrow. Today is almost over. Don't keep the recommendation tickets. Give them to me, okay? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 389. Did we change the words just now? Yes, from come in and out to beasts and worse than beasts. Your little handmaiden won't laugh at us anymore, will she? That depends on whether she hears it or not. What kind of person is third sister? You're asking me? Am I asking the heaven and the earth? What do you want to ask? How did third sister enter the academy? When I was summoned to the 2nd floor of the academy with 6 A+ grades, third sister was already everyone's third sister. How would I know how she entered the academy? Can you not tell us about your glorious deeds every time we talk about the history of the academy? I'm really tired of hearing it. But I did get 6 A+ grades. Who could get that in so many years? I remember you gave up on 2 subjects during the academy entrance exam and took a blank piece of paper? Forget it. Ning Kei and Chen Pippi sat outside the cliff cave, gnawing on the corn cob cooked by Sang Sang in advance and chatting vaguely. But the process of chatting was as childish and boring as usual. Chen Pippi was in no mood to discuss the no-boundary spirit with Ning Kei because he was worried about whether the little girl from the Devil's Doctrine could escape from third sister's hands. After sitting at the entrance of the cliff cave for a while, he finally could not help but stand up and said seriously, "I forgot something important." Ning Kei waved his hand to show that he understood and said with a smile, "No matter you are in a hurry to go to the toilet, or the headmaster wants to test your homework, whatever the reason, just go." Chen Pippi smiled awkwardly, and was about to walk down the cliff platform when he suddenly thought of something. He took out an old book and threw it to Ning Quebec. Ning Kei took the old book and said in surprise, "Is this the 3rd book?" The headmaster prepared 3 books for him, and he had learned 2. He knew that he would see the 3rd book sooner or later, but he did not expect that he would get it so quickly and easily. "No," Chen Pippi said. "The scholar knew that you were imprisoned in the cliff cave and wanted to see you. He thought that the mountain was too high and wasted his time, so he asked me to bring you a book as a gift to relieve your boredom." Ning Kei looked at the cover of the book and asked in confusion, "Tea scripture?" Chen Pippi nodded and said, "Scholars say that tea can clear the mind. If you don't have the time or the mood to make tea, you can read the tea scripture. It can also have the same effect." "I don't need to drink tea, and I don't need to read tea classics. My heart is already clear enough," Ning Kei said. "Otherwise, why do you think I haven't lost my temper?" Chen Pippi laughed awkwardly and turned to walk out of the cliff plateau. After a while, he stopped again, wiped the sweat off his face, and walked back to the cliff cave. He said helplessly, "Second brother asked me to inform you of another thing, so I'll leave after you finish it." Ning Kei was slightly startled and asked, "What is it?" Chen Pippi said, "A few days ago, a sword master from the South Jin Kingdom submitted a letter of challenge to the academy." Ning Kei said with a smile, "It turns out that there are people who are not afraid of death in the world." Chen Pippi said, "That great sword master is young, but he is very powerful." Even Chen Pippi praised the strength of the South Jin Kingdom, which surprised Ning Quebec. He asked, "Is there another grand cultivator in the Knowing Destiny state?" Chen Pippi shook his head and said, "They are not weeds by the roadside. How can we meet one every time we want?" Ning Kei thought, "There are at least 5 or 6 powerhouses in the Knowing Destiny state in the front yard of the back mountain of the academy, including you. Doesn't that mean you are weeds or wildflowers by the roadside?" Chen Pippi said, "That great sword master from the South Jin Kingdom has been immersed in the upper see-through state for many years, so he must have seen the threshold of the Knowing Destiny state. He is probably similar to Prince Long Qing when he first came to Chang'an." Ning-Ke always felt that there was something strange about this matter. The upper see-through state was indeed a very powerful existence in the eyes of the world's cultivators. But when Prince Longqing came to Chang, and with a dazzling reputation, Chun Pippi still did not pay attention to him. Why did he pay so much attention to this great sword master from the South Jin Kingdom? More importantly, that great sword master was only in the upper see-through state. Why did he dare to submit a letter of challenge to the Academy? He suddenly thought of a possibility and asked tentatively, did that great sword master from the South Jin Kingdom not leave after he was defeated? Chun Pippi shook his head and said, he was not defeated, so of course he did not leave. Ning-Ke said, even if second brother did not fight, you could have easily sent that person away. What happened? Chun Pippi looked at him and said, that sword master from the South Jin Kingdom clearly stated that he wanted to challenge you. Ning-Ke thought that it was as he expected. He pointed at the bedding and futon in the cliff cave and said, I am a prisoner now. Chun Pippi comforted him and said, you will be able to get out one day. Ning-Ke walked into the cave and pulled out a bamboo chair. He leaned comfortably on the back of the chair and said, I don't care. Since the Academy is not afraid of losing face and no one to accept the challenge, then let that great sword master from the South Jin Kingdom stand guard at the entrance of the Academy. It is not spring and the weather is not warm yet. I think he will not wait too long. Chun Pippi said, it is not that we do not want to fight, but we cannot. Ning-Ke was slightly surprised. He sat up straight and asked, why? Because that sword master from the South Jin Kingdom will not fight with us at all. Chun Pippi said helplessly, once he sensed that we were about to appear, he would shout idiotic words about sacrificing himself to the sword at the entrance of the Academy, as if he would commit suicide at any time. Ning-Ke said mercilessly, if he wants to commit suicide, then so be it. Why do you care so much? At most, ask the handyman teachers in the front yard to prepare a few more buckets of water and wash the blood away. Chun Pippi said, because his background is a little tricky. His family and a few professors in the Academy are old friends. He only sat at the entrance of the Academy and was extremely respectful and sincere. He said that he would wait for you to finish your cultivation and come out of seclusion before seeking a fair fight. We really have no reason to drive him away. Ning-Ke said, why does he have to fight with me? Chun Pippi said sympathetically, perhaps because everyone knows that you are the weakest among us. Ning-Ke had long become numb to such descriptions. He sighed and said, in the end, the weakest one was pushed to the front by you guys to fight to the death. Suddenly, he thought of Chun Pippi's words and asked, who is this sword master? Chun Pippi reminded him. He is from the South Jin Kingdom. Ning-Ke suddenly thought of that dazzling golden name and his expression suddenly became solemn. He looked at Chun Pippi in disbelief and asked, the most powerful person in the world, the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai actually wants to challenge me? Chun Pippi was stunned and then said angrily, do you think this is possible? Ning-Ke came to his senses and said awkwardly, it seems that it is indeed not possible. Although that great sword master from the South Jin Kingdom is not the Sage of Sword, he is indeed related to Lu Bai. Therefore, since he has lowered himself, we can't do anything even if we are disgusted and annoyed as if we had eaten a fly. If second brother fights today, how can we fight with Lu Bai in the future? Chun Pippi said, that person is Luiqing, the youngest brother of Lu Bai. It is said that he has been cultivating in the private house of the Lu family and has not entered the sword garret. Therefore, he is not well known. It was not until he entered Chang, and alone that the world knew that the Lu family has another young powerhouse in sword Taoism. Ning-Ke asked, now I am locked in the cliff cave by my teacher and can't get out in a short time. Why did second brother ask you to tell me about this? Luiqing has been sitting at the gate of the Academy for a whole 7 days. Chun Pippi looked at him and said, He sits on the futon, drinking the water provided by the academy and eating his own dry food. He meditates all day long just to wait for you to come out of seclusion. Looking at his behavior, it would not be surprising if he waited at the gate of the academy for a year. Lu Yiqing's attitude is respectful but extremely persistent. No matter how the professors in the front yard persuade him, he only smiled slightly and refused to leave or enter the academy to wait. Although the futon he is sitting on is not blocking the path of the students, sitting at the gate of the academy every day is like blocking the gate of the academy in the eyes of others. People passing by can't help but talk about him. This matter has already spread to Chang, and I'm afraid it will soon spread to the whole world. Chun Pippi said, "Second brother is a little annoyed, so he asked me to tell you that a powerhouse has come to challenge you outside the academy. He hopes that you can remove the inhibition and come out of the cave as soon as possible." Ning Ke asked after a moment of silence, "What is Lu Yiqing's state and strength?" Chun Pippi knew that he was not asking about states like see-through and knowing destiny, but specific combat strength. However, he had rarely fought in his life and could not make an accurate evaluation. Suddenly, he remembered that second brother had sighed with emotion when he stood on the mountainside and looked at the South Jin swordsman sitting cross-legged at the gate of the academy. Second brother said that if Lu Yiqing does not lose his lucky chance, he will most likely catch up to his brother in the future. Ning Ke was stunned and then fell into silence again. He did not expect such a wonderful story to happen outside the academy on the other side of the mountain after being imprisoned in the cliff cave for more than 20 days. He also did not expect that after defeating Monk Guan Hai from the Lank Temple and killing Master Dao Shi from the Xiankong Temple, his cultivation in the human realm had not ended. Someone still came to challenge him, and that person was the younger brother of Lu Bai, the Sage of Sword, the strongest in the world. The real problem was that even second brother thought that he had the potential to become the second Sage of Sword. Ning Ke thought for a long time and suddenly laughed. He lay back on the cool bamboo chair and took out a silk handkerchief from his sleeve and gently covered his face. Chun Pippi asked in confusion, "What are you doing?" Ning Ke's voice sounded a little dull through the silk handkerchief. "I want to sleep." Chun Pippi said, "Someone is blocking the gate of the academy and wants to challenge you. How can you sleep?" "Just like what we have said these days. He can't come in and I can't go out. No matter how strong that person from the South Jin Kingdom is, he can't hurt me. What do I have to worry about? Aren't you worried that the academy's reputation will be damaged? Will the academy's reputation be destroyed just because I am sleeping? If I really can't bear it anymore, I believe that second brother will not care about Lu Bai's face and will definitely kill that guy." Ning Ke turned his body and lay comfortably in the cave, leaving his back to Chun Pippi. He said, "Help me pass a message to Lu Yiqing. Tell him that Mr. 13 is now cultivating in martial arts and talisman and will need at least 3 months of seclusion. If he can bear the smell of horse dung in the meadow, the dust from the carriage wheels and the low temperature at night, he can wait as long as he wants. I don't care even if the flowers wilt. There is no 5th chapter. I can't take it anymore. I am going to sleep. I will still have 4 chapters tomorrow. It would be wonderful if the plot could be completed smoothly. Good night, everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.